Okay, picture this. What if the kid who couldn't even make a proper clone was secretly harboring the memories of the most overpowered guild master in anime history? I'm talking about Ainz here, people. The guy who literally conquered a world with nothing but big brain energy and an arsenal of spells that could delete you from reality. And now, those tactical memories are bleeding into Naruto's head during his biggest failures. Imagine going from dead last to coordinating shadow clone armies like some kind of military genius overnight. We're watching Naruto accidentally become the most terrifying strategist in the ninja world while still just wanting to eat ramen and make friends. This story is pure chaos. Kakashi's having existential crises, Sasuke's questioning everything he knows about his teammate, and Naruto's just trying not to accidentally reveal he thinks like someone who's commanded undead legions. Hit that like if you're ready for some psychological warfare mixed with wholesome ninja bonds, and let's jump into this beautiful mess. The taste of dirt mixed with blood wasn't new to Naruto Uzumaki. Hell, he'd been eating it for most of his 12 years. But this time felt different. This time, as he lay face down in the academy courtyard with Iruka-sensei's disappointed sigh echoing above him, something cold twisted in his gut that had nothing to do with his failed transformation jutsu. "I'm sorry, Naruto." Iruka's voice carried that particular brand of gentle regret that somehow hurt worse than outright mockery. "You'll have to try again next year." Naruto pushed himself up, spitting out a clump of grass. Around him, the other students were already celebrating, their brand new hit gleaming in the afternoon sun. Sasuke stood with his arms crossed, looking bored. Sakura was practically bouncing with excitement. Even Shikamaru, who'd probably slept through half the exam, wore his forehead protector with lazy pride. But Iruka-sensei, Naruto's voice cracked slightly. "I did everything else right. The written test, the weapons portion, the clone technique is fundamental," Iruka said, not unkindly. "A genin who can't perform basic replication jutsu is a liability to his team. You know this." Yeah, he knew this. Just like he knew that tomorrow the whispers would start again, the same ones that had followed him since he could walk. Demon brat can't even graduate. Should have expected it. The crowd began to disperse, students rushing off to celebrate with families who actually wanted them around. Naruto stayed put, watching his classmates disappear one by one until only he and Iruka remained in the empty courtyard. "You'll get it next time," Iruka said, placing a hand on Naruto's shoulder. "I believe in you, liar." The thought came from nowhere, sharp and bitter. Naruto blinked, startled by his own cynicism. Where had that come from? Iruka-sensei was probably the only person in the village who actually gave a damn about him. "Yeah," Naruto managed, forcing his usual grin. "Next time for sure, Tebayo." But as he watched Iruka walk away, that cold feeling in his stomach only grew worse. 3 hours later, Naruto sat alone on the academy swing. Watching families celebrate through the windows of Yakiniku-Q, the Akimichi clan had apparently rented out the whole place for Choji's graduation party. Through the glass, he could see kids his age laughing, eating, being normal, being wanted. "Rough day," Naruto turned to find Mizuki-sensei approaching, his silver hair catching the streetlight. Unlike Iruka, Mizuki had never bothered with the gentle approach. He was direct, practical, honest. "Hey, Mizuki-sensei." Naruto tried to inject some enthusiasm into his voice. "Just taking a break before I get back to training." "Training for next year's exam?" Mizuki sat down on the swing beside him. "You know, there might be another way." Something in Mizuki's tone made Naruto's attention sharpen. "Another way? There's a makeup test. Special circumstances only." Mizuki's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "But it would require you to prove yourself in a way the academy doesn't usually ask for." "What kind of way?" Mizuki glanced around, then leaned closer. "Have you ever heard of the Scroll of Seals?" The Hokage Tower felt different at night. Empty corridors that bustled with activity during the day now stretched like dark throats, swallowing the sound of Naruto's footsteps. He clutched the massive scroll against his chest, its weight both physical and symbolic. "One technique," Mizuki had said. "Learn one technique from the scroll and I'll pass you personally. The Hokage doesn't need to know." It had seemed so simple when Mizuki explained it. A shortcut, sure, but not exactly breaking any rules, just bending them a little. And after 6 years of failure, Naruto was willing to bend quite a lot. Now, sitting in a moonlit clearing deep in the forest, Naruto unrolled the ancient parchment. The techniques listed inside made his eyes widen. Most of the names meant nothing to him, but even he could recognize the classification levels. S rank, A rank, forbidden techniques that regular ninja spent decades mastering. His finger traced down the scroll until it stopped at something that caught his attention, Keijibunshin no Jutsu, shadow clone technique. It was still a clone jutsu, but the description made his regular bunshin look like a child's game. These clones weren't illusions, they were real, solid, capable of independent action. The chakra requirement was listed as extreme, but Naruto had always had more chakra than he knew what to do with. Maybe that was his edge. He spent the next 2 hours practicing, and by the time he heard footsteps approaching through the trees, he'd managed to create exactly one shadow clone. Just one, but it was perfect, solid, real. There you are, Iruka burst through the tree line, breathing hard. Behind him came Mizuki, but something was wrong with the picture. Mizuki was carrying kunai and his expression. Iruka-sensei, Naruto scrambled to his feet, relief flooding through him. You found me. I learned a technique from the scroll, just like Mizuki-sensei said. Now I can, Naruto, get away from him. Iruka's shout cut through his excitement. Mizuki used you, there is no makeup test. The world seemed to tilt. What? He's after the scroll, Naruto. It contains forbidden jutsu that could destroy the village. Mizuki's laugh was cold, nothing like the encouraging teacher who'd spoken to him just hours before. Well. Iruka-sensei always was too soft. He hefted a large shuriken, its metal gleaming wickedly. But since you're here, let me tell you something interesting about your precious student. Mizuki, don't. 12 years ago, the nine-tailed fox attacked our village. Mizuki's voice rose to a shout. Many people died, including Iruka's parents, but the fox wasn't killed, it was sealed inside a newborn baby. That baby was you, Naruto. You are the nine-tailed fox. The words hit Naruto like physical blows. He staggered backward, his mind reeling. The fox, the demon, the monster that destroyed everything. That's why everyone hates you, that's why you'll never be acknowledged. You're not human, you're the demon that murdered their families. Something roared in Naruto's ears. The world spun, colors bleeding together. He was dimly aware of Iruka shouting, of Mizuki laughing, but it all seemed to come from very far away. You are not human. The phrase echoed in his skull, and suddenly he wasn't standing in a forest anymore. He was somewhere else. Somewhere dark, filled with the glow of screens and the hum of machinery. He was older, much older, and his name was Mamanga. The memory hit him like a tidal wave. Guild leader of Ainz Overlord of the Great Tomb of Nazarick, undead sorcerer supreme. He remembered dying, his human body failing as the game's servers shut down forever. He remembered the transition, the strange sensation of becoming something else, something more, something not human. But this was wrong. He was Naruto, wasn't he? 12 years old, academy student, ramen lover. Not some undead overlord from a massive shuriken whistled through the air toward Iruka's back. Time slowed. Naruto watched the weapon spin through the moonlight, watched Iruka turn with desperate eyes, watched death approach with mathematical precision. Range 4.2 meters. Velocity 28 meters per second. Impact in 0.15 seconds. Iruka's reaction time insufficient. The calculation came from nowhere, cold and precise. In that frozen moment, Naruto understood something fundamental about himself, something that made his stomach drop. He wasn't just Naruto anymore. Shadow clone jutsu, the words tore from his throat with authority he'd never possessed. Not one clone appeared, but dozens, hundreds. They filled the clearing like an army, each one moving with purpose, with tactical precision. Mizuki's confident expression crumbled. Impossible. You can barely make one regular clone, but Naruto wasn't listening. He was seeing the battlefield with new eyes, calculating angles, assessing threats, coordinating his forces like pieces on a board. It was as natural as breathing. Formation 7 Alpha, pincer movement, overwhelm and subdue. The clones moved as one, surrounding Mizuki with fluid grace. The traitorous Chunin threw another shuriken, but 3 clones intercepted it while 2 more tackled him from behind. In seconds, it was over. Mizuki lay unconscious in the dirt, and Naruto stood over him, breathing hard. Around him, his shadow clones waited for orders with perfect discipline. Naruto, he turned to find Iruka staring at him with a mixture of pride and something else. Concern, fear. That was incredible, Iruka said slowly. I've never seen shadow clones used with such coordination. It was like watching a seasoned jounin. Naruto opened his mouth to respond, but the words that wanted to come out weren't his own. They belonged to someone else, someone who had commanded armies and conquered worlds. Someone who understood what it meant to be called a monster. Naruto's voice cracked. I don't know how I did that. It was true and it wasn't. Part of him, the part that was still just Naruto, had no idea what had happened. But another part, a growing part, remembered commanding the Guardians of Nazarick with the same effortless authority. Iruka approached slowly, as if he were approaching a spooked animal. "Naruto, are you all right? You seem different, yeah, that was one way to put it." "Iruka-sensei," Naruto said, his voice smaller than it had been moments before. "What Mizuki said about the fox. Is it true?" Iruka's face crumpled. "Naruto, is it true?" A long pause, then, "Yes, but you're not the fox, Naruto. You're the hero who contains it. You're the one who keeps it from destroying everything." Hero. The word felt strange in his mouth, in his. Other memories, heroes were typically enemies to be defeated. Obstacles to be overcome through superior strategy and overwhelming force. But looking at Iruka's earnest face, at the man who'd risked his life to protect him despite knowing what he carried, Naruto felt something warm bloom in his chest. Something that belonged entirely to this life, this identity. Do you still see me as a student?" Naruto asked quietly. Iruka smiled, pulling off his own hitate. "I see you as what you've always been, my student. My little brother." He tied the forehead protector around Naruto's head with gentle hands. "Congratulations, Naruto, you graduate." The metal felt cool against his skin, but the gesture made something hot sting behind his eyes. This was what he'd wanted for so long, and yet you're not entirely you anymore, are you? The thought whispered through his mind in a voice that wasn't quite his own. As Iruka led him back toward the village, chattering about team assignments and the responsibilities of being a ninja, Naruto touched the hitate with trembling fingers. He was Naruto Uzumaki, newly minted genin of Kono Hagakure. But he was also someone else, someone with memories of commanding respect through fear, of viewing subordinates as tools, of calculating the most efficient path to victory regardless of moral cost. The question that would haunt him for months to come formed in his mind as they walked through the sleeping village. Which one was he really? Behind them, Mizuki groaned softly in the dirt, but neither of them looked back. There would be Chenbu along soon enough to collect the traitor. Naruto's shadow clones had already dispersed, but the memory of their perfect coordination lingered. That hadn't been luck or instinct. That had been the tactical mind of someone who'd spent years managing complex operations, someone who understood the mathematics of warfare, someone who definitely wasn't supposed to be a 12-year-old boy from a ninja village. As they reached the edge of the forest, Naruto made a decision. Whatever was happening to him, whatever these memories meant, he couldn't let them consume who he was now. Iruka had called him a hero, and heroes protected people, even if they had to do it with the mind of a monster. The village lights twinkled ahead of them like stars, and for the first time in his life, Naruto Uzumaki walked toward them as both himself and someone else entirely. The real test, he realized, would be figuring out how to be both. The academy classroom felt smaller than Naruto remembered. Maybe it was because he'd grown overnight, not physically, but in ways that made his skin feel tight and unfamiliar. 3 days had passed since the incident with Mizuki. 3 days of broken sleep, filled with dreams of empty hallways and skeletal servants bowing before a throne he'd never seen, but somehow knew intimately. "Team 7, Iruka announced, consulting his clipboard with the same careful attention he'd always shown. "Naruto Uzumaki, Sasuke Uchiha, and Sakura Haruno." Naruto's head snapped up from where he'd been staring at his hands. Sasuke, of course it would be Sasuke. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. From across the room, Sakura's groan of dismay was audible even over the general chatter. "Why do I have to be stuck with Naruto?" she whined, not bothering to lower her voice. "And why isn't Ino on Sasuke's team?" "Because," came a voice in Naruto's head that sounded uncomfortably analytical, "the teams are balanced for maximum conflict and growth potential. The dead last, the prodigy, and the kunoichi with something to prove. It's a classic formation designed to force adaptation through friction." Naruto blinked, startled by the clinical assessment. Where the hell had that come from? But even as he tried to dismiss it, his eyes were already cataloging his teammates with disturbing precision. Sasuke Uchiha, last survivor of a prestigious clan. Exceptional technical skills but emotionally compromised by trauma. Likely to prioritize personal vendettas over team cohesion. A powerful subordinate with questionable loyalty, the type who needed careful management. Sakura Haruno. Civilian-born with above-average theoretical knowledge but minimal practical experience. Emotionally invested in maintaining team harmony, though her infatuation with Sasuke created potential complications. useful for intelligence gathering and support, but required protection in direct combat. The assessments flowed through his mind with the ease of long practice, as if he'd evaluated hundreds of subordinates before. Which was impossible because he was 12 years old and had never led anything more complex than a prank. Right, your Jounin instructor will meet you after lunch, Iruka continued. Until then, get to know your teammates. As the other teams began filtering out, chattering excitedly about their assignments, Team 7 found themselves standing in an awkward triangle. Sakura was glaring at Naruto like he'd personally ruined her life plans. Sasuke was staring out the window with his usual air of barely contained contempt for the world. And Naruto was fighting the urge to assign them positions and establish a clear chain of command. Stop it, he told himself firmly. These are your friends. Well, potentially your friends. You don't command friends, don't you? The other voice whispered back, leadership requires hierarchy. Without clear authority, teams fracture under pressure, you know this. So, Naruto said aloud, forcing cheerfulness into his voice, we're teammates now. This is gonna be great. Tebayo, Sakura rolled her eyes. Oh, wonderful, I'm stuck with the class clown and Mr. Antisocial. Chen. Sasuke's contribution to team building was, as always, a masterpiece of monosyllabic dismissal. For a moment, Naruto felt his old response bubbling up, the hurt, the defensive anger, the desperate need to prove himself through increasingly ridiculous antics. But underneath that familiar emotional pattern, something else stirred. Something cold and calculating. Sakura's hostility stems from insecurity about her own abilities. She's using aggression to establish her position in the group hierarchy. Sasuke's withdrawal is a defensive mechanism. He's been betrayed before and expects it to happen again. Both are manageable with the right approach. The analysis was correct, Naruto realized with growing unease. He could see the patterns now, the psychological frameworks that drove his teammates' behavior. It should have felt like understanding, like empathy. Instead, it felt like seeing them as chess pieces. You know what? Naruto said, his voice taking on a different quality, still friendly, but with an undertone of authority that made both Sakura and Sasuke look at him more carefully. We should probably figure out how we're going to work together. Our Jounin instructor is going to test us, and I'm guessing it won't be easy. Sakura blinked. Test us. But we already graduated. The teams are provisional, Sasuke said quietly, speaking for the first time. His dark eyes fixed on Naruto with something that might have been curiosity. The pass rate for Genin teams is roughly 30%. Exactly. Naruto nodded, pleased despite himself that Sasuke had reached the same conclusion. So we need to be smart about this. What are our individual strengths? The question hung in the air. Sakura looked like she wasn't sure if this was a trick, while Sasuke's expression had shifted to something approaching interest. I have excellent chakra control, Sakura said slowly, and my theoretical knowledge scores were the highest in class. I'm the top graduate, Sasuke added with characteristic bluntness. Taijutsu, ninjutsu, weapons, I excel in all combat categories. Both of them looked at Naruto expectantly. The old Naruto would have boasted about his stamina, maybe made some ridiculous claim about being future Hokage. But the words that came out of his mouth were different. I have massive chakra reserves and an affinity for unorthodox tactics. My shadow clone technique is unusually effective. He paused, considering. More importantly, I'm good at reading people, understanding what motivates them. It was true, he realized. Not just because of whatever was happening to him, but because he'd spent his whole life watching people, trying to figure out why they looked at him with such hatred. He'd learned to read expressions, to anticipate reactions, to find the weak points in social armor. Skills developed through necessity often prove more valuable than formal training. So, Naruto continued, his mind already working through possibilities. Sakura's our tactical coordinator and support specialist. Sasuke's our primary combatant and technical expert. I'm flexible support and psychological warfare. The phrasing felt natural, like he'd given similar briefings countless times before. Both his teammates were staring at him now with expressions that mixed surprise with something else, a grudging recognition that maybe the dead last wasn't quite as dead last as they'd assumed. That's, Sakura started, then stopped. That's actually pretty smart, Naruto. Of course it's smart. You've managed thousands of subordinates. You understand organizational structure better than most people understand breathing. The thought came with such casual confidence that it made Naruto's stomach lurch. Because he was 12, he'd never managed anything. So where was this knowledge coming from? We should eat lunch together, he heard himself saying. Team building, and we can discuss potential scenarios for this afternoon's test. Sasuke tilted his head slightly. You seem different, Dobi. The insult carried less venom than usual, more like genuine observation. Naruto felt heat rise in his cheeks, but before he could respond with his usual bluster, that other voice whispered. He's probing, testing to see if the change is surface level or substantial. Respond with confidence, not defensiveness. People change, Naruto said simply, sometimes all at once. Lunch was a revelation in small-scale leadership dynamics. They'd ended up at Ikaraku's, Naruto's suggestion, though he'd framed it as neutral ground. Rather than admitting it was the only place in the village where he felt genuinely welcome. Sakura had wrinkled her nose at the humble ramen stand, but Sasuke had just shrugged and taken a seat. So, Naruto said as they waited for their orders, what do we know about Chunin qualification tests? They're designed to test teamwork, Sakura recited, clearly drawing from her textbook knowledge. The failure rate is high because most genin teams can't coordinate effectively under pressure. But what kind of pressure? Naruto pressed. Combat scenarios, information gathering. Survival challenges, Sasuke was watching him with those sharp dark eyes. You're thinking like a strategist. It wasn't quite a question, but Naruto heard the implied inquiry. When did the dead last start thinking 3 moves ahead? I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, Naruto said, which was true enough. About what it means to be a ninja. About what we're really training for. War, the voice in his head supplied helpfully. All ninja training ultimately serves the purpose of creating more effective killers. Everything else is propaganda designed to maintain morale. Naruto pushed the thought away, focusing instead on his teammates' faces. Sakura looked thoughtful, like she was reassessing everything she thought she knew about him. Sasuke looked, calculating. The test will probably involve combat, Sasuke said finally, but not straight-up fighting, something that requires us to work together despite our obvious personality conflicts. Bell test, Naruto said suddenly. The words came from nowhere, but he was absolutely certain. Classic misdirection scenario. The instructor has something we need to obtain, but there aren't enough for everyone. Creates artificial scarcity to see if we'll abandon teammates for personal success. Both his teammates stared at him. How do you know that? Sakura asked. Naruto opened his mouth, then closed it. How did he know that? The certainty felt like muscle memory, like recalling a lesson he'd taught rather than learned. It makes sense, he said weakly. If you wanted to test teamwork under pressure, you'd create a scenario where cooperation seems disadvantageous. Sasuke's eyes had gone very narrow. You've been different since the graduation exam. Sharper, more focused. He's suspicious. Sasuke survived by being paranoid. He recognizes when someone's behavior doesn't match their established patterns. You need to give him a plausible explanation or risk losing his cooperation. The thing with Mizuki changed me, Naruto said, letting some genuine emotion color his voice. I realized I've been playing around when I should have been taking this seriously. People died to make me a ninja. I owe it to them to be better. It was true in its way, just not the whole truth. Sakura's expression softened. That's actually really mature, Naruto. Sasuke continued watching him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. As long as you don't go back to being an idiot when things get difficult. He's testing your commitment. Respond with confidence but not arrogance. I won't, Naruto said simply. We're a team now. I'm not going to let you down. The words carried weight he hadn't intended, authority that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his conscious mind. For just a moment, both Sakura and Sasuke looked at him like they were seeing someone entirely different. Someone worth following. Their Chunin instructor was late. They'd been waiting in the assigned classroom for over an hour, and Sakura was beginning to fidget. Sasuke maintained his stoic composure, but Naruto could see the slight tension in his shoulders that suggested growing irritation. Psychological warfare, the analytical voice observed. Making subordinates wait establishes dominance while testing patience and discipline. Elementary but effective. He's testing us, Naruto said aloud. Obviously, Sasuke replied. The question is what kind of test? Patience, maybe, or he wants to see how we handle uncertainty. Sakura was trying to contribute to the strategic discussion, but her suggestions lacked the edge of real understanding. She's never been in a position where waiting could mean death, the voice noted clinically. Neither of them understand the psychological pressure of extended anticipation, but Naruto did somehow. He could feel the way prolonged waiting wore at mental defenses, how uncertainty ate at confidence. It was a tactic he'd used before. That didn't make sense, but the knowledge felt solid, experiential. "There's more to it than that," he said slowly. "Look at the setup." He gestured around the classroom, 3 desks arranged in a triangle, all facing inward. "We're positioned so we have to look at each other while we wait. No distractions, no way to avoid interaction. If he just wanted to test patience, he'd have us wait separately." Sasuke's eyes sharpened. "Social pressure. He wants to see how we handle extended contact without external structure to define our roles. And whether we'll turn on each other when we get frustrated," Naruto added. The insight came with disturbing clarity. Some teams fall apart during the waiting period, start blaming each other for the delay, questioning each other's competence. Divide and conquer. Make them paranoid about their allies so they become easier to manipulate individually. Sakura looked between them with growing realization. "That's actually kind of cruel." "It's effective," Naruto said, then caught himself. That wasn't something the old Naruto would have said. The old Naruto would have been outraged by the manipulation, not impressed by its efficiency. When had he started thinking like this? The door opened before he could pursue that disturbing line of thought. Their instructor stepped through, tall, silver-haired, wearing a mask that covered most of his face. One eye was exposed, lazy and amused, while the other was hidden beneath his hideate. "My first impression of you 3, the Jounin said conversationally, "is that you're interesting." His visible eye fixed on each of them in turn. When it reached Naruto, something flickered across his expression, surprise, maybe, or recognition. "He knows," the voice whispered urgently. "He can see the change in your behavior patterns. You need to deflect his attention before he starts asking uncomfortable questions." "You're late," Naruto said, injecting just enough of his old brashness to sound normal. "We've been waiting forever." Tebayo, the Jounin's expression relaxed slightly. "Sorry about that. A black cat crossed my path, so I had to take the long way around." Transparent lie designed to test our reactions. He's establishing that he considers us beneath serious consideration. "That's the stupidest excuse I've ever heard," Sakura muttered. "Anyway," the instructor continued, "let's move to a more appropriate location for introductions." Roof. Now, the academy rooftop offered a panoramic view of Konoha, the village spread out below them like a living map. Their instructor settled onto the low wall with casual grace, gesturing for them to sit on the steps. "Let's start with introductions. Name, likes, dislikes, dreams for the future. I'll go first." He smiled, though the mask made it hard to read. "My name is Kakashi Hatake. I have many likes and dislikes. My dreams for the future? Well, I'd rather not share those." Minimal information sharing. He's maintaining psychological distance while encouraging us to reveal potentially exploitable details about ourselves. "That told us nothing," Sakura protested. "Your turn," Kakashi said, pointing at her. "Pinky first." As Sakura launched into her introduction, likes, dislikes, and her painfully obvious dream of winning Sasuke's affection, Naruto found himself studying their instructor with new eyes. The lazy posture was carefully constructed, designed to make opponents underestimate his capabilities. The visible eye seemed relaxed, but it was constantly moving, cataloging details, assessing threats. "This one's dangerous," the voice observed with something approaching respect. "Experienced, intelligent, and significantly more powerful than he's letting on. He's evaluating us on multiple levels simultaneously." Sasuke's introduction was predictably terse, a recitation of his goal to kill a certain someone delivered with cold intensity that made Sakura shiver. Revenge motivation, powerful but ultimately self-destructive. He'll be effective in the short term but unreliable for long-term operations unless his obsession can be redirected. Then it was Naruto's turn. "I'm Naruto Uzumaki." He put enthusiasm into his voice but kept it controlled. "I like ramen and training and people who don't give up on their friends. I dislike people who judge others without understanding them and the 3 minutes it takes for instant ramen to cook." Kakashi's visible eyebrow rose slightly. The old Naruto would have stopped there, maybe added something about becoming Hokage, but the words that came out next surprised even him. "My dream is to become strong enough to protect everyone I care about, and to prove that people can change no matter what others expect from them." The statement hung in the air. It was true, truer than anything he'd said in years, but it also felt like a mission statement. A declaration of intent that went beyond simple ambition. Leadership begins with clearly defined objectives. Kakashi studied him for a long moment. Interesting, he said finally. Very well, we'll have our real test tomorrow morning. Training ground 3, 5 a.m. sharp. Don't eat breakfast, you'll just throw it up. He stood to leave, then paused. Oh, and don't believe everything you read about teamwork. In the ninja world, those who break the rules are scum. But those who abandon their friends are worse than scum. With that cryptic statement, he vanished in a swirl of leaves, leaving Team 7 alone on the rooftop. Well, Sakura said after a moment, that was ominous. Bell test, Naruto said with absolute certainty. Tomorrow's definitely a bell test. Sasuke looked at him sharply. You keep saying that, how can you be so sure? Naruto opened his mouth, then closed it. How could he explain that the scenario felt familiar, like a tactical exercise he'd run dozens of times before? That he could already see the optimal strategy for success? Because you have run it before, the voice whispered. Different setting, different parameters, but the same fundamental test of loyalty versus individual achievement. You know this because you've been the one administering it. The thought was impossible. He was 12 years old. He'd never administered anything more complex than a prank. So why did it feel so true? Just a feeling, he said finally. But I think I know how to beat it. Both his teammates looked at him expectantly. We stick together, Naruto said simply. Whatever he throws at us, we face it as a team, no matter what, even if it means individual failure. The voice asked mockingly, even if it costs you everything you think you want. Even then, Naruto said aloud, not caring that his teammates looked confused by the apparent non sequitur. Because maybe that was the real test. Not whether he could think strategically or command effectively, but whether he could choose to be Naruto Uzumaki instead of whoever else he was becoming. The sun was setting over Konoha, painting the village in shades of gold and red. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices. But tonight, sitting on the academy roof with his teammates, Naruto felt something he hadn't experienced in his fragmented memories of that other life. He felt like he belonged somewhere, even if he wasn't entirely sure who he was anymore. Training ground 3 looked different at 5 in the morning. Mist clung to the memorial stone like ghostly fingers, and the practice posts cast long shadows across the dewy grass. Naruto arrived first, despite having barely slept. His dreams had been filled with images that didn't belong to him, throne rooms carved from bone, armies of undead bowing in perfect synchronization, and the weight of absolute authority pressing down on his shoulders like a physical thing. He'd woken up speaking a language he didn't recognize. You're early. Naruto spun around to find Kakashi perched on one of the practice posts, reading what looked like a small orange book. The Jounin's visible eye crinkled in what might have been amusement. Eager to fail. I don't plan on failing, Naruto replied, the words coming out with more confidence than he felt. There was something about Kakashi that put him on edge, not fear exactly, but the instinctive wariness of someone who recognized a superior predator. He's testing your composure, the analytical voice observed. The early arrival, the casual dismissal, the provocative question, all designed to gauge your emotional stability under pressure. Confidence is good, Kakashi said mildly, but overconfidence kills ninja faster than any enemy jutsu. Sasuke arrived next, moving with his usual fluid grace. He nodded to Naruto, an acknowledgement that would have seemed insignificant to anyone else, but Naruto caught the subtle respect in the gesture. Yesterday's strategic discussion had shifted something between them. Sakura stumbled in 5 minutes later, looking like she'd wrestled with her alarm clock and lost. Sorry, I couldn't find my She stopped mid-sentence, noticing the 2 bells hanging from Kakashi's belt. Those are your objective, Kakashi confirmed, jingling the bells with one finger. Your task is simple, take these bells from me before noon. Those who fail get tied to those posts, he gestured to the memorial stone, and watch the others eat lunch. Classic misdirection, the voice noted with something like professional appreciation. 2 bells, 3 students, creates artificial scarcity to test individual versus group loyalty. But there are only 2 bells, Sakura said, her face pale. That's right, Kakashi's visible eye curved in a smile that didn't reach his tone. At least one of you is definitely going back to the academy, maybe all 3. Naruto felt his teammates tense beside him. Sasuke's hand drifted toward his kunai pouch, while Sakura took a half-step backward. The fear was palpable, and for a moment, Naruto almost got swept up in it. Then that other voice whispered, fear is a tool. He's using it to cloud your judgment. The real test isn't about the bells, it's about how you respond to manufactured pressure. When do we start? Naruto asked, his voice steady. Kakashi tilted his head slightly. When I say, Naruto moved. not toward Kakashi, but sideways, grabbing both his teammates and rolling behind the nearest practice post just as a barrage of shuriken whistled through the space they'd been occupying. Interesting, Kakashi's voice drifted from somewhere above them. Most genin freeze when I do that. Good reflexes, Naruto. He's probing for leadership qualities. The question is whether you displayed tactical thinking or lucky instincts. He was never going to let us get ready, Naruto whispered to his teammates. The test started the moment we arrived. Sasuke's dark eyes studied him intently. How did you know he was going to attack? Body language, Naruto replied, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. Something about Kakashi's posture had screamed imminent violence to instincts he didn't remember developing. His weight shifted to his throwing arm right before he spoke. Lie, you recognized the setup because you've used similar tactics. The fake start, the misdirection, the sudden escalation, classic techniques for testing subordinate reaction times. So what's the plan? Sakura asked, her voice tight with anxiety. Naruto's mind was already racing through possibilities, calculating odds and potential outcomes with disturbing efficiency. We stick together. The bell thing is a trick. If we fight each other for them, we all fail. But there are only 2 bells, Sakura protested. Exactly, it's designed to make us abandon each other. Naruto peered around the post, scanning for their instructor. Kakashi's way too strong for any of us individually. Our only chance is coordinated assault. Correct tactical assessment. Also demonstrates that you understand the psychological component of the exercise. Kakashi will be evaluating this conversation as much as your combat performance. Formation? Sasuke asked, his tone purely professional now. Triangle assault, rotating positions every 30 seconds so he can't predict our patterns. Sakura, your support and tactical coordinator, stay back and watch his movements, call out weak points. Sasuke, your primary assault, fast attacks to keep him busy. I'll be flexible support, creating openings for both of you. Both his teammates stared at him. The plan was solid, detailed, and delivered with the kind of authority that suggested extensive experience with small unit tactics. That's Sakura started. Actually brilliant, Sasuke finished, looking surprised. When did you learn tactical coordination? When you commanded the floor guardians of Nazarick through countless mock battles and strategic exercises. The thought came with such clarity that Naruto almost staggered. For a moment he could see it, a vast throne room, multiple screens showing different battle scenarios, himself directing movements with casual expertise born of years of experience. But that was impossible. He was 12, he'd never commanded anything. I read a lot, he lied, then raised his voice. Kakashi-sensei, we're ready, a chuckle echoed from multiple directions at once. Are you? We'll see. Come and take them if you can. The battle was a revelation in controlled violence. Kakashi moved like liquid death, flowing between their attacks with minimal effort. Every time one of them thought they'd found an opening, he was somewhere else, usually with a kunai pressed against their throat or a hand poised to strike a nerve cluster. But they were learning, adapting. Left side, 12 o'clock, Sakura called from her position behind a tree. He favors that leg after the last exchange. Sasuke immediately adjusted his approach, forcing Kakashi to dodge right, directly into the path of Naruto's shadow clone assault. 3 clones materialized in perfect formation, boxing the Jounin in while the real Naruto attacked from above. Kakashi dealt with the threat efficiently, but for just a moment, his visible eye showed something that might have been approval. He's not fighting at full capacity, the analytical voice observed, probably using less than 20% of his actual capabilities. This is an evaluation, not a genuine combat scenario. The realization should have been discouraging, but instead, Naruto found it liberating. If Kakashi wasn't trying to win, then the real test was something else entirely. Switch, he called, and his teammates flowed into new positions without hesitation. They'd been fighting for 20 minutes now, and their coordination was improving with each exchange. Good, they're learning to trust your tactical judgment. Leadership requires competence, but it also requires that subordinates believe in your competence. You're working well together, Kakashi observed as he deflected another of Sasuke's attacks. But working together toward the wrong goal is still failure. He was right, Naruto realized. They were fighting beautifully as a team, but they were no closer to actually getting the bells. Kakashi was too skilled, too experienced. Even coordinated, they were still just academy graduates facing a veteran Jounin, which means the solution isn't tactical, it's strategic. Sakura, Sasuke, Naruto called out. Disengage, his teammates immediately broke off their attacks, falling back to defensive positions. Kakashi settled into a relaxed stance, watching them with obvious curiosity. Giving up? The Jounin asked. Changing tactics. Naruto stepped forward, his hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. You said those who abandon their friends are worse than scum. I did. Then the real test isn't about taking the bells. Naruto's voice carried conviction that surprised even him. It's about proving we won't abandon each other for personal success. Kakashi's visible eye went very still. The bells are a distraction, Naruto continued, feeling his way through the logic. You want to see if we'll sacrifice our teammates for individual advancement. But a ninja who would do that isn't worth training, is he? Correct. This entire exercise is designed to identify subordinates who will prioritize group loyalty over personal benefit. The bells are irrelevant, the real objective is demonstrating proper values. So we all pass, Sasuke said quietly, understanding dawning in his voice, or we all fail. Together, Sakura added, her chin rising defiantly. As a team, they moved to stand beside Naruto, presenting a united front. For a long moment, Kakashi just watched them, his expression unreadable behind the mask. Then he smiled. Congratulations, he said simply. You pass, that was incredible. Sakura was practically bouncing as they walked through the village, still riding the high of their success. Kakashi had treated them to lunch at a small restaurant, explained the true nature of the test, and officially welcomed them to Team 7. I can't believe we figured it out, she continued. Well, I can't believe Naruto figured it out. When did you get so strategic? When you spent decades managing complex organizational hierarchies and running tactical simulations, the voice supplied helpfully. Lucky guess, Naruto said instead, trying to ignore the way Sasuke was studying him with those sharp eyes. That wasn't luck, Sasuke said flatly. That was tactical analysis followed by strategic insight. You've been hiding your capabilities. The accusation hung in the air. Naruto felt his cheeks heat up, but before he could respond, Kakashi cleared his throat. Tomorrow we start taking missions, their instructor announced. Nothing too exciting at first, D-rank assignments to help you work as a team. Meet at 7 a.m. training ground 3. He vanished in a swirl of leaves, leaving the 3 genin standing in the street. D-rank missions, Sakura sighed. That means farming and painting fences, doesn't it? Probably, Sasuke agreed. Though after today, I'm starting to think there might be more to even simple missions than we realize. He looked meaningfully at Naruto, who tried not to squirm under the scrutiny. He's suspicious but not hostile. That's manageable. The key is to maintain plausible deniability while gradually demonstrating increased competence. I should get going, Naruto said quickly. See you tomorrow. He was halfway down the street when Sasuke's voice stopped him. Naruto. He turned back to find his teammate watching him with an unreadable expression. Good work today, Sasuke said simply. Don't go back to being an idiot. It was probably the closest thing to a compliment he'd ever gotten from Sasuke. As Naruto walked home, he found himself smiling despite the growing confusion in his head. You're enjoying this, the voice observed. The tactical challenge, the leadership role, the respect from subordinates. It feels natural, doesn't it? It did, Naruto realized. Leading the team, coordinating their efforts, finding the strategic solution, all of it had felt as comfortable as breathing. More comfortable than anything else in his life, actually. But that raised uncomfortable questions about who he really was. 3 weeks of D-rank missions followed. Painting fences, catching cats, weeding gardens, mundane tasks that most genin found tedious. But Naruto approached each assignment with the same strategic mindset he'd shown during the Bell test, optimizing their methods and coordinating their efforts until even Kakashi started looking impressed. You know, Sakura said as they finished corralling a particularly stubborn cat, this is actually kind of fun when we work together properly. Chen. Sasuke's response was characteristically minimal, but Naruto caught the small smile that flickered across his face. They were a team now, in ways that went beyond official designation. The constant missions had worn away the rough edges of their personalities, leaving behind something that functioned with increasing smoothness. Effective subordinate integration, the voice noted approvingly. You've successfully established group cohesion and loyalty. They trust your judgment now, it was true. Somewhere along the way, his teammates had started looking to him for tactical decisions, deferring to his strategic insights without being asked. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like responsibility. All right, Team 7, Kakashi announced as they reported their completed mission, I think you're ready for something more challenging. They were in the Hokage's office, surrounded by the controlled chaos of village administration. Iruka sat at a desk nearby, sorting through mission requests, while the third Hokage reviewed their performance reports. More challenging how? Naruto asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. C-rank mission. Escort duty most likely, the natural progression from menial labor to actual ninja work. C-rank escort mission, the Hokage confirmed, sliding a scroll across his desk. A bridge builder in Wave Country has requested protection during his journey home. Bandits have been targeting travelers in the region. Naruto felt something cold settle in his stomach. Wave Country. He knew that name, though he couldn't place where from. More disturbing was the certainty that this mission would be more dangerous than advertised. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it usually is. "What aren't you telling us?" Naruto asked before he could stop himself. The question surprised everyone in the room. Kakashi's visible eyebrow rose, while the Hokage studied Naruto with newfound attention. "What makes you think we're not telling you everything?" the old man asked mildly. "Because C-rank missions don't usually require such detailed briefings. Because you're watching our reactions too carefully. Because this feels like a setup." "Just a feeling," Naruto said aloud. "You seem careful about this one." The Hokage and Kakashi exchanged a look that confirmed Naruto's suspicions. There was definitely more to this mission than simple bandit trouble. "The client specifically requested a team with a reputation for creative problem-solving," the Hokage said finally. "Your performance on recent missions has been exemplary." Translation. "This mission has complications that require flexible thinking rather than standard protocols." "We'll take it," Naruto said, ignoring Sakura's surprised look. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow morning." "Pack for extended travel." Kakashi was studying Naruto with that piercing gaze again, "and be prepared for the unexpected." As they left the Hokage tower, Sakura grabbed Naruto's arm. "Why did you accept so quickly? Don't you want to know more about what we're getting into?" "Because gathering information beforehand is less valuable than maintaining operational flexibility. Better to adapt to unknown circumstances than to be constrained by incomplete intelligence." "Because that's what teams do," Naruto said instead. "We face whatever comes together." It was a good answer, the kind of thing the old Naruto would have said. But as they walked through the village, preparing for their first real mission, that cold feeling in his stomach only grew stronger. "Something's coming," the voice whispered. "Something that will test more than your tactical abilities." For the first time since his memories began awakening, Naruto found himself hoping the voice was wrong. But he had a sinking feeling it was right. Their client was drunk. Not stumbling down the street drunk, but Naruto could smell the sake on Tsunade's breath from 3 feet away. The bridge builder stood in the village gates with the practiced steadiness of someone who'd learned to function while intoxicated, his weathered hands clutching a bottle like a lifeline. "These are the ninja you're sending to protect me." Tsunade's voice carried the particular blend of belligerence and despair that Naruto was beginning to recognize as a defense mechanism. "They're just kids," deflection through aggression, the analytical voice observed. "He's more frightened than he's letting on. The drinking is self-medication, not celebration." "We may be young," Sakura said stiffly, "but we're fully qualified." "It's fine," Naruto interrupted, earning a sharp look from his teammate. "You're scared, Tsunade-san, that's why you're drinking. Something about this job has you terrified." The bridge builder's face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about, kid. Terrible liar." Micro-expressions indicate extreme anxiety poorly masked by artificial bravado. Whatever he's hiding, it's significant. "Sure you don't," Naruto said mildly. "Let's go." As they set out on the forest path toward Wave Country, Naruto found himself cataloging details with disturbing precision. The way Tsunade kept glancing over his shoulder. How his hand trembled slightly when he thought no one was watching. The fact that he'd specifically requested ninja protection for what should have been a routine journey through friendly territory. All indicators point to this being significantly more dangerous than advertised, the voice noted. The question is whether the danger comes from the client's enemies or the client himself. "You're doing it again," Sasuke said quietly, falling into step beside him. "Doing what?" "That thing where you analyze everything like you're planning a military campaign." Sasuke's tone was curious rather than accusatory. "Where did you learn to read people like that?" Naruto opened his mouth to deflect, then stopped. Sasuke had been nothing but honest with the team since their formation. Maybe he deserved better than constant lies. "I've always been good at watching people," Naruto said finally. "Had to be growing up the way I did, but lately." He paused, trying to find words for something he didn't fully understand himself. Lately it feels like I remember things I never learned. Careful, too much honesty could raise questions you're not prepared to answer. Like what kind of things? Sasuke pressed. Tactics, strategy. How to read a situation and see all the angles. Naruto's voice dropped lower. Sometimes I feel like I've done all this before, but that's impossible because I'm 12 and I grew up in Konoha and I've never been anywhere else. Sasuke was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried an odd note of understanding. After my family died, I started having dreams about techniques I'd never seen, fighting styles I'd never learned. The Sharingan carries memories, inherited knowledge from previous generations. He's offering you a plausible explanation for your condition. Accept it gratefully and move on. Maybe it's something like that, Naruto said, relief flooding his voice. Jinchuriki are supposed to have weird side effects, right? Right, Sasuke agreed, though his expression suggested he didn't entirely believe either explanation. Behind them, Kakashi was reading his orange book with apparent disinterest, but Naruto caught the way his visible eye kept flicking toward their conversation. Their sensei was listening to every word, filing away information for later analysis. He suspects something. Kakashi's too experienced to miss the inconsistencies in your behavior. You'll need to be more careful. The attack came at the worst possible moment. They just stopped for a brief rest beside a large puddle, which should have been the first warning sign, since it hadn't rained in days, when two figures exploded from the water in a spray of chain and killing intent. The demon brothers moved with professional efficiency, their clawed gauntlets connected by a length of spiked chain. One moment Kakashi was standing beside them, the next he was wrapped in metal links and torn apart in a spray of blood and fabric. Sakura screamed. Tsunade stumbled backward, his bottle shattering on the forest floor. And Naruto felt time slow to a crawl. Primary target eliminated. Two hostiles, coordinated assault pattern. Civilian asset compromised, team cohesion failing. The analysis flowed through his mind with mechanical precision, even as horror warred with tactical necessity. Kakashi was dead, their sensei, their protector, their anchor gone in seconds. No. Focus, emotional responses are a luxury you cannot afford in combat situations. The voice was right. Grief could come later. Right now, his teammates needed leadership. Sasuke, the command cracked like a whip. Left target, standard engagement. Sakura, protect the client. Both his teammates responded instantly, muscle memory overriding shock. Sasuke launched himself at the nearest demon brother with textbook precision, while Sakura grabbed Tsunade and hauled him behind a tree. But Naruto was already moving, his mind calculating angles and probabilities with cold efficiency. The remaining brother was advancing on Sasuke's flank, preparing to use the chain to entangle and eliminate him. Unacceptable. Subordinate preservation takes priority. 3 shadow clones materialized in perfect formation, not random copies, but tactical units with specific roles. The first intercepted the chain strike aimed at Sasuke. The second flanked left to cut off the enemy's retreat. The third did something that shouldn't have been possible. Instead of attacking, it grabbed the chain and began chanting in a language Naruto didn't recognize but somehow understood. The metal began to glow with an eerie blue light, frost spreading along its length. Basic ice enchantment. Temporary but effective for disrupting enemy equipment. The demon brother's eyes went wide as his weapon became too cold to hold. He released the chain with a curse, just in time for Sasuke to nail him with a devastating combination that sent him crashing into a tree. The fight was over in less than 30 seconds. What the hell was that? Sasuke demanded, breathing hard as he looked between Naruto and the still glowing chain. That wasn't any jutsu I've ever seen. Naruto stared at the enchanted metal, his heart hammering. That shouldn't have been possible. Shadow clones could use basic techniques, but they couldn't perform magic that didn't exist in this world. Yet he could still feel the lingering traces of mana expenditure, as familiar as breathing. First-tier spell application through chakra medium, the voice explained helpfully. Crude but functional adaptation of magical principles to local energy systems. I don't know, Naruto said honestly. It just felt right. Before anyone could respond, slow clapping echoed from the trees above them. Not bad, kids, not bad at all. Kakashi dropped from the canopy, completely uninjured and looking annoyingly pleased with himself. Though Naruto, I'm curious about that technique you used. I've never seen anything quite like it. Substitution jutsu, he was never in danger. This was another test. You're alive? Sakura's relief was palpable, but Naruto felt something else entirely. Not relief, but a cold anger that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. He allowed you to believe your commander was dead. He subjected his subordinates to unnecessary psychological trauma for the sake of a training exercise. You let us think you were dead, Naruto said, his voice flat and dangerous. You made us watch you get torn apart. Kakashi's visible eye sharpened. It was necessary to, it was cruel. The words came out with an authority that silenced everyone present. Fear is a tool, but using it against your own people without purpose is the mark of incompetent leadership. Correct assessment. A proper commander would have debriefed immediately after the exercise to prevent psychological damage. This one enjoys the psychological manipulation for its own sake. The clearing went very quiet. Even Tsunade had stopped sniffling to stare at Naruto, who was facing down their Jounin instructor with the kind of steady confidence that shouldn't have existed in a 12-year-old boy. Interesting perspective, Kakashi said mildly. And where exactly did you develop such strong opinions about leadership? Dangerous ground, deflect. Common sense, Naruto replied, though his hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. Sir, the honorific came out through gritted teeth, but it seemed to satisfy something in Kakashi's expression. Their sensei nodded slowly, then turned to address the team as a whole. As you've probably figured out, this mission isn't what we were told. These men are Chunin-level assassins, not bandits. He gestured to the unconscious demon brothers. The question is, do we continue knowing the danger or turn back? He's testing team cohesion under pressure. Standard protocol would be mission abandonment, but there are political considerations that make retreat inadvisable. What do you think, Tsunade? Naruto asked, ignoring the surprised looks from his teammates. Want to tell us who's really after you? The bridge builder's face crumpled. I can't afford A-rank mission rates. My country is poor, we're being bled dry by Gato and his thugs. If I'd told the truth, Konoha would have assigned the mission to experienced teams, and we don't have that kind of money. Economic coercion leading to mission classification fraud. Predictable but problematic. So you lied to get cheaper protection, Sasuke said coldly. I did what I had to do, Tsunade's voice cracked. My people are dying. Gato controls all the shipping, all the trade. The bridge is the only way to break his stranglehold on Wave Country. Without it, we'll starve. Legitimate grievance but still technically fraud. However, abandoning the mission now would likely result in civilian casualties and political complications. We continue, Naruto said before anyone else could respond. Naruto, Sakura started. We continue, he repeated, his tone brooking no argument. We knew this was going to be more dangerous than advertised. Now we know exactly how much more dangerous, but people are depending on us. Correct tactical decision. Also demonstrates commitment to subordinate welfare over personal safety, which will improve team loyalty. Kakashi was studying him with that piercing gaze again. You're sure this could very well be a suicide mission for Genin? Then we don't act like Genin. Naruto met his sensei's eye steadily. We act like the ninja Konoha trained us to be. The mist came with dawn. They'd spent the night in a small fishing village on the border of Wave Country, their last stop before entering truly hostile territory. The locals had been friendly enough, but Naruto noticed how they kept glancing toward the water with obvious fear. Heavy mist's not natural, one old fisherman had muttered. Means the demons hunting. Now, as their small boat cut through water so thick with fog that visibility dropped to mere feet, Naruto understood what the man had meant. This wasn't weather, it was a tactical deployment. Concealment technique. Large-scale area denial through environmental manipulation. Sophisticated application. Stay close, their boatman whispered, his voice tight with terror. And whatever you do, don't make noise. He might not notice us if we're quiet. Unlikely. If this is what I suspect, he already knows exactly where we are. The attack came without warning. A massive blade materialized out of the mist, spinning end over end with lethal precision. Their boatman screamed and dove overboard, abandoning his passengers to whatever fate awaited them. Kakashi moved to intercept, but Naruto was already in motion. Not to dodge, to analyze. Trajectory calculated. Spin rate consistent with thrown weapon. Origin point. There. 12 o'clock, 40 meters, he shouted, even as he grabbed Tsunade and hauled him flat against the boat's deck. The sword passed overhead with inches to spare, embedding itself in the boat's mast with a solid thunk that shook the entire vessel. A moment later, A figure materialized on the weapon's hilt, tall, bandage-wrapped, radiating killing intent like a physical force. "Well, well," the figure said, his voice carrying the particular brand of confidence that came with absolute certainty of victory. "Kakashi of the Sharingan, I should have known Gato would eventually attract your attention." Identification. Momochi Zabuza, the Demon of the Mist. A rank missing nin, master of silent killing, extremely dangerous. The knowledge came with disturbing clarity, as if Naruto had studied detailed intelligence reports on their opponent. Which was impossible because he'd never heard of Zabuza before this moment. "Zabuza," Kakashi replied calmly, though Naruto caught the slight tension in their sensei's posture. "Still working for whoever pays the most. Money talks, copy ninja, and Gato pays very well to keep his business interests secure." Zabuza's grip shifted on his massive sword. "Nothing personal, but you and your brats are bad for business. Mercenary motivation. No ideological commitment, purely financial. Potentially exploitable through superior economic incentive or demonstration of futility." "Manji formation," Kakashi ordered quietly. "Protect the bridge builder." Naruto felt his teammates shift into the defensive pattern they'd practiced dozens of times, but his attention was focused on Zabuza. The missing nin was evaluating them with professional interest, his gaze lingering on each team member in turn. When those cold eyes fixed on Naruto, something passed between them, a moment of recognition that neither should have been possible. "He knows," the voice whispered urgently. "He can sense the change in your nature. You're registering as more dangerous than you should be." "Interesting," Zabuza mused. "The dead last of Konoha's latest batch." "But you don't feel like dead last, do you, kid?" The question hung in the mist-filled air like a challenge. Naruto felt his teammates' eyes on him, waiting for his response. Behind him, Tsunade was trembling with fear. Ahead of him, one of the most dangerous missing nin in the world was studying him like a puzzle to be solved. "This is the moment," the voice noted clinically. "Your response here will determine how the rest of this engagement unfolds. Choose carefully." Naruto straightened, meeting Zabuza's gaze without flinching. "Feelings mutual. You don't seem as scary as your reputation suggests." It was a calculated insult, designed to provoke an emotional response that might create tactical opportunities. The old Naruto would never have been so coldly strategic, but the old Naruto wouldn't have been able to stare down the demon of the mist without breaking a sweat. Zabuza's laugh was like grinding stone. "Oh, I like this one. He's got spine." The massive sword lifted from the mast with casual ease. "Let's see how long it lasts." The mist thickened around them, cutting visibility to zero. In the suffocating whiteness, Naruto heard his teammates breathing quicken with fear. Environmental control established. Opponent has home field advantage. Standard tactics, divide and conquer through sensory deprivation. "Stay calm," Naruto whispered, his voice carrying just enough to reach his team. "He's using the mist to hide his position, but it works both ways. Listen for movement, watch for displaced water." Good tactical thinking. "Also, you need to prepare for the real threat." "What real threat?" Naruto whispered, then realized he'd spoken aloud. Before anyone could ask what he meant, the temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many seconds. The mist began to crystallize, forming geometric patterns that had nothing to do with natural weather. Ice manipulation. Secondary combatant incoming. "Behind you," Naruto spun, kunai materializing in his hand, just in time to deflect a senbone needle that would have taken Sasuke in the throat. The attacker stood on the water's surface as if it were solid ground, slender, wearing a hunter nin mask, moving with the fluid grace of someone who'd never known physical limitations. But it was the eyes behind the mask that made Naruto's breath catch. Brown eyes filled with pain and determination, and something that looked almost like apology. Analysis. Female, approximately 14 years old, extensive combat training. Emotional attachment to primary combatant suggests personal rather than professional relationship. "Hunter nin," Kakashi said grimly. "This just got a lot more complicated." But Naruto was already moving, his tactical mind processing the new variables with mechanical precision. Two opponents, coordinated assault, environmental control established. His team was outclassed in terms of raw power, but you're not thinking like a genin anymore, are you? "No," Naruto whispered, and this time he meant for the voice to hear. "I'm not." He created a dozen shadow clones in perfect formation, each one moving with purpose and precision that belonged to someone with decades of tactical experience. But instead of sending them directly at the enemies, he did something that made both Zabuza and his companion hesitate. He began to coordinate them like chess pieces. Formation Delta 7, he called softly, and his clones shifted into a complex pattern that maximized their effectiveness while minimizing exposure to counterattack. Standard engagement protocols. Where did you learn those command structures? The question came from outside his head, from Kakashi, whose visible eye had gone very wide indeed. I have no idea, Naruto replied honestly, even as his clones executed a flanking maneuver that would have impressed veteran Chunin. But right now, I don't think it matters. The battle for Wave Country had begun in earnest, and somewhere in the mist-shrouded chaos, Naruto Uzumaki was discovering that he knew far more about war than any 12-year-old had a right to. Even if he couldn't remember learning it, the mist had become a living thing. It swirled around them with unnatural patterns, responding to Zabuza's will like an extension of his body. Somewhere in that gray void, the demon of the mist was hunting, and his hunter-nin companion moved like a ghost made manifest. But Naruto wasn't thinking about the mist anymore. His mind had shifted into something else entirely, a state of cold calculation that felt as natural as breathing, even though it terrified him. Battlefield assessment. Low visibility, enemy territorial advantage, teammates operating below optimal efficiency due to sensory deprivation. Solution, information warfare. Sasuke, he called softly, his voice carrying just enough to reach his teammate. Cast your fireball jutsu straight up, maximum intensity. That's insane, Sasuke hissed back. It'll give away our position, that's the point. Naruto's tone carried an authority that made his teammate hesitate. Trust me, trust, such a fragile thing, yet so essential for effective command. Your subordinates must believe in your competence even when they cannot understand your strategy. Sasuke's fireball erupted skyward like a miniature sun, burning through the mist and illuminating the entire area for precious seconds. In that brief window of clarity, Naruto saw everything. Zabuza crouched on a broken mast 15 feet to their left, the hunter-nin balanced impossibly on a shard of ice above them, the subtle positioning that revealed their intended attack pattern. More importantly, his shadow clones saw it too. Execute, he whispered. What happened next shouldn't have been possible for Academy graduates. His clones moved with the precision of a veteran military unit. 3 immediately began weaving hand seals in perfect synchronization, not for any jutsu Kakashi had taught them, but for something that came from memories that weren't quite his own. Coordinated elemental manipulation. Basic tactical magic adapted for chakra medium. The water around their boat began to freeze in geometric patterns, creating barriers and platforms with mathematical precision. It wasn't quite ice manipulation, that would come later with different knowledge, but it was close enough to change the battlefield's dynamics entirely. Impossible, came Zabuza's voice from the mist. No genin has that level of coordination control. Correct. No genin does, but you're not just a genin anymore, are you? The thought sent a chill down Naruto's spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. As his clones continued their tactical deployment, he felt memories that belonged to someone else bleeding through. Images of commanding floor guardians through complex raid scenarios, of coordinating magical effects across multiple spellcasters, of treating battles like elaborate chess games where every piece had a specific role. Naruto, Sakura's voice was tight with confusion and growing fear. What are you doing? This isn't any technique they taught us at the academy. Before he could answer, the hunter-nin descended like a falling star, senbone needles glittering in her hands. She moved with deadly grace, each thrown weapon perfectly aimed to incapacitate rather than kill. Sublethal targeting. She's trying to disable rather than eliminate. Interesting tactical choice, suggests emotional compromise regarding collateral damage. Sakura, drop, Naruto commanded, and his teammate obeyed instantly. The senbone passed through the space she'd occupied, embedding themselves in the boat's hull with soft thunks. But Naruto was already moving, not away from the attack but toward it. His body flowed through combat stances he'd never learned, muscle memory guided by experience that shouldn't have existed. Third-tier spell adaptation. Enhanced reflexes through chakra amplification. Time seemed to slow as he intercepted the hunter-nin's descent. His hand moved in a complex pattern that felt both foreign and familiar, and the air around them began to shimmer with visible energy. What? The hunter-nin started to say, then gasped as her momentum carried her into what felt like solid air, force barrier. Crude but effective adaptation of magical principles. She rebounded from the invisible wall, landing hard on the ice platform his clones had created. For a moment, her mask had shifted, and Naruto caught a glimpse of wide brown eyes filled with shock and something that might have been recognition. She knows this shouldn't be possible either. Interesting technique. Zabuza's voice carried a new note of respect as he emerged from the mist, his massive sword resting casually on his shoulder. Mind telling me where a Konoha genin learned combat magic? The words hung in the air like an accusation. Combat magic. That's what it was, wasn't it? Not chakra techniques, not anything that belonged in this world, but actual magical application adapted to local energy systems. You're beginning to understand, the voice whispered. The memories aren't just random knowledge. They're operational experience from someone who mastered these techniques over decades of use. I don't know what you're talking about, Naruto said, but his voice lacked conviction. How could he explain something he didn't understand himself? Kakashi was staring at him with undisguised concern now. Naruto, that barrier technique, I've never seen anything like it. Where did you learn it? Dangerous question. Your sensei is beginning to suspect that you're not entirely who you claim to be. Naruto started then stopped. The truth was impossible, but so was lying to his team in the middle of a life-or-death situation. I don't know, he said finally. Sometimes I just know things, like they're memories that belong to someone else. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. But instead of falling, he felt something like relief. The constant strain of pretending to be normal, of hiding knowledge that came from nowhere, it was exhausting. Memories that don't belong to you. The hunter nin had pushed herself to her feet, her voice carrying a note of understanding that surprised everyone. That's not unheard of. Some bloodlines carry inherited knowledge, others develop it through trauma. She's offering you an explanation. Accept it gratefully. Maybe that's it, Naruto said, latching onto the lifeline she'd provided. The 9 tails, maybe it comes with side effects nobody talks about. It wasn't exactly a lie, just not the whole truth. Zabuza was watching this exchange with growing amusement. Well, this is fascinating, but I'm afraid we don't have time for psychological analysis. His grip shifted on his sword. Gato's paying me to eliminate obstacles, not provide therapy. Combat resumption imminent. Prepare for escalation. Wait, Naruto said, raising his hand. You're working for Gato, right? What's he paying you? The question seemed to surprise everyone, including Zabuza himself. Why does that matter, kid? Economic warfare. If you cannot defeat an opponent through superior force, attempt to undermine their motivation for fighting. Because, Naruto said, his mind racing through possibilities with disturbing speed, I'm wondering if we can offer you a better deal. Kakashi's visible eye went very wide. Naruto, what are you doing? What needs to be done? This engagement serves no strategic purpose beyond Gato's economic interests. Remove the financial incentive, remove the threat. Think about it, Naruto continued, addressing Zabuza directly. You're risking your life and your partner's life for what, a paycheck? But if the bridge gets built, Wave Country opens up new trade routes. New opportunities for someone with your specialized skills. The missing nin tilted his head, intrigued despite himself. Go on. Partner with us instead of opposing us. Help us eliminate Gato and his organization. In exchange, you get a piece of every contract that comes through Wave Country once the bridge is operational. Naruto's voice carried the confidence of someone who'd negotiated countless deals. Long-term profit instead of short-term payment. Where did you learn business negotiation? Came Sakura's amazed whisper. Guild management involves extensive economic planning and resource allocation. You've negotiated hundreds of contracts for services, supplies, and territorial agreements. The memory came with crystal clarity, sitting in a vast office overlooking digital landscapes, reviewing proposals from other guilds, calculating profit margins and strategic advantages. But that was impossible. He'd never done any of those things, had he? Tempting offer, Zabuza mused. But it assumes we can actually eliminate Gato's entire operation. The man has resources you can't imagine. Incorrect assessment. I can imagine them quite clearly. Private military contractors, economic manipulation, political corruption, standard criminal enterprise structure. I can imagine them just fine, Naruto said aloud, and I can plan around them. The words came out with such casual confidence that everyone fell silent. Even the hunter nin was staring at him now, her masked face tilted with curiosity. You're not a normal genin, she said finally. No, you're not. The question is, what are you becoming? Before Naruto could answer, a new voice cut through the mist, harsh, nasal, dripping with the kind of entitled arrogance that came from too much money and not enough consequences. Well. What do we have here? Gato stepped onto the deck of a much larger boat, flanked by what looked like 24 mercenaries armed with swords, crossbows, and the kind of casual cruelty that money could buy. The small man's eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction as he surveyed the scene. Zabuza, you disappointment. I specifically told you to handle this quietly. Primary target acquired. Gato. Civilian, non-combatant, relies entirely on hired muscle for protection. High-value elimination target. The thought came with such cold precision that Naruto actually stepped back from it. That wasn't how he was supposed to think about people. Even enemies deserved, didn't they? Enemies deserve whatever treatment serves your strategic objectives. Sentiment is a luxury that gets subordinates killed. Shut up, Gato, Zabuza growled. I'm working. Working? Gato's laugh was like breaking glass. This is work, chatting with children while my business interests hang in the balance. He gestured to his mercenaries, who began spreading out with practiced efficiency. Kill them all, the bridge builder, the ninja, everyone. I'm tired of complications. Threat assessment. 24 hostile combatants, varied skill levels, standard weapons, numerical superiority but lacking coordination. Manageable with proper tactics. Kakashi-sensei, Naruto said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that made his instructor turn immediately. Permission to coordinate our response. There was something in his tone, a certainty, a competence that went beyond anything a genin should possess. Kakashi hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. Do it. Excellent. Now let's show them what coordinated warfare actually looks like. Naruto raised his hands, and every shadow clone on the battlefield turned to face him with perfect synchronization. When he spoke, his voice carried across the water with the kind of projection that came from addressing large groups. Formation Omega Prime, full engagement protocols, no survivors. Wait, no survivors. That's not, but the clones were already moving, flowing across the battlefield like a military unit that had trained together for years. They struck with precision and coordination that transformed chaos into choreography, each movement calculated for maximum efficiency and minimal waste. It was beautiful, it was terrifying, and it was exactly the kind of tactical brilliance that belonged to someone who had commanded armies, not a 12-year-old boy from a ninja village. As the battle erupted around them, Naruto found himself wondering, for perhaps the first time, if he was still Naruto Uzumaki at all, or if he was becoming someone else entirely. The battle lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Naruto knew the precise timing because part of his mind, the part that was becoming disturbingly familiar, had been tracking every detail with mechanical precision. Casualty rates, ammunition expenditure, tactical efficiency ratings. Numbers that painted the violence in clinical terms, stripped of the messy reality of blood and screaming. 24 mercenaries had become 0 mercenaries with the kind of methodical thoroughness that belonged in textbooks, not real combat. Jesus Christ, one of Gato's surviving boat crew whispered in the sudden silence. What the hell are you people? Naruto stood in the center of the carnage, his shadow clones dispersed, their memories flooding back to him in a torrent of tactical data and combat feedback. He should have felt sick, should have been horrified by what he'd orchestrated. Instead, he felt satisfied. Excellent execution, the voice noted approvingly. Minimal friendly casualties, complete objective achievement, psychological impact maximized for future deterrent effect. Naruto, Kakashi's voice cut through the analytical haze like a blade. Their sensei was looking at him with an expression that mixed concern, confusion, and something that might have been fear. What did you just do? The question hung in the salt air like an accusation. Around them, the aftermath of perfect tactical coordination was impossible to ignore. Bodies arranged in patterns that spoke of deliberate positioning rather than chaotic combat. Wounds placed with surgical precision to achieve maximum incapacitation with minimum effort. It looked like the work of a seasoned military commander, not a 12-year-old boy. I did what needed to be done, Naruto replied, his voice steadier than it had any right to be. Correct response. Leadership requires making difficult decisions that subordinates may not understand or approve of. You killed them all, Sakura whispered, her face pale with shock. They weren't even real ninja, just people who were attempting to kill you and your teammates. Eliminating threats is basic operational necessity. They made their choice when they drew weapons, Naruto said, the words coming out with cold certainty. I just made sure they couldn't hurt anyone else. Sasuke was studying him with those sharp dark eyes, but his expression was unreadable. The coordination, he said finally. Your clones moved like they'd trained together for years. That's not possible with standard shadow clone technique. He's beginning to understand that you're operating beyond normal parameters. Decide whether to trust him with partial truth or maintain operational security. A lot of things aren't supposed to be possible, Naruto replied. Doesn't seem to stop them from happening. Zabuza had been watching this exchange with growing interest. His hunter-nin companion, Haku, Naruto realized with knowledge that came from nowhere, stood beside him with her mask removed, revealing a face that was both beautiful and deeply troubled. You fight like someone who's commanded armies, Zabuza observed. But that's impossible, isn't it? You're just a kid from Konoha, he suspects. But suspicion without proof is manageable. Apparently I'm full of surprises, Naruto said, then turned to address Gato directly. The crime boss was cowering behind an overturned crate, his earlier arrogance replaced by naked terror. His expensive clothes were stained with salt water and what looked suspiciously like his own urine. You, Naruto said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made grown men flinch. Stand up, command voice. Project dominance through vocal control and posture. Make them believe they have no choice but to obey. Gato scrambled to his feet, his hands shaking. Look, kid, I don't know what kind of demon you are, but I'm not a demon, Naruto interrupted, taking a step forward. Gato immediately stepped back, his survival instincts recognizing a predator when they saw one. I'm something much worse. What are you doing? Came Sakura's horrified whisper. Psychological warfare. Establishing dominance through fear rather than respect. More efficient but potentially damaging to team morale. I'm someone who understands exactly what you are, Naruto continued, advancing on the trembling man. A parasite. A leech who builds wealth by bleeding others dry. The kind of person who hides behind hired muscle because they're too weak to fight their own battles. Each word was precisely chosen for maximum psychological impact. Naruto could see the effect they were having. Gato's face was going progressively paler, his breathing becoming more ragged. But here's the thing about parasites, Naruto said, stopping just outside arm's reach. They only survive as long as the host doesn't realize they can be removed. Excellent intimidation technique. He's completely demoralized. Now offer the terms that ensure compliance. You're going to leave Wave Country, Naruto continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting. You're going to liquidate all your assets here and distribute the money to the people you've been exploiting. And you're going to do it quietly without causing any more trouble. Gato's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish gasping for air. But my business, you can't just, I can and I am. The authority in Naruto's voice was absolute, backed by the kind of casual confidence that came from never doubting your ability to enforce your will. Because the alternative is that I decide you're too dangerous to leave alive. Perfect. He believes you're capable of following through on the threat. Compliance probability, 93%. The silence that followed was broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against the boat hulls. Everyone was staring at Naruto, his teammates with growing alarm, the adults with something approaching awe. Okay, Gato whispered finally. Okay, I'll do it, just don't hurt me. Victory achieved through psychological dominance rather than continued violence. Efficient. Smart choice, Naruto said, then turned to address Zabuza. Your turn. Are we partners or enemies? The demon of the mist looked between Naruto and the cowering crime boss, then threw back his head and laughed. It was a sound like grinding stone, but there was genuine amusement in it. Kid, I've seen some scary things in my time, but that was something else entirely. He shouldered his massive sword with casual ease. You've got a deal. I'm curious to see what you do next. Excellent. Acquired a valuable subordinate without extended combat. Your tactical efficiency is improving. What I do next, Naruto said, is finish building this bridge. 3 days later, Naruto stood on the completed span of what the villagers were already calling the Great Naruto Bridge. The name made him uncomfortable for reasons he couldn't quite articulate, because you understand the psychological power of having infrastructure named after you. It creates lasting influence and establishes your reputation for future operations. The bridge stretched across the water like a promise made manifest, connecting Wave Country to the mainland and all the opportunities that came with it. Below, fishing boats were already taking advantage of the new trade routes, their holds full of goods that would have been impossible to transport before. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like the end of something he couldn't name. You've been quiet since the fight, Kakashi said, appearing beside him with that soundless movement that all elite ninja seemed to master. Just thinking, Naruto replied, not looking away from the water. About what? About the fact that you felt more alive commanding those shadow clones in battle than you felt doing anything else in your entire life. About how natural it felt to threaten Gato with death. About the way your teammates have been looking at you since, like you're someone they don't quite recognize anymore. About what comes next, Naruto said instead. Kakashi was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a note of concern that he usually kept hidden. You scared them, you know, your teammates, the way you handled that final battle. I saved their lives. Yes, you did. But the methods you used, Kakashi paused, choosing his words carefully. They weren't techniques I taught you. They weren't techniques anyone taught you. So where did they come from? Dangerous question. Your sensei is too intelligent to accept simple deflections much longer. I don't know, Naruto said, and for once, it was completely honest. Sometimes I feel like I'm remembering things that never happened to me. Knowledge that belongs to someone else. Someone who ruled through fear and respect. Someone who treated subordinates as resources to be managed. Someone who understood that power without the will to use it was meaningless. Someone who knew how to lead, Naruto said quietly. Someone who understood what it meant to be responsible for other people's lives. Kakashi studied his profile for a long moment. And that's what you want. To be a leader, the question hit deeper than Naruto expected. Did he want to lead? Or was he simply becoming someone who had no choice but to lead? Leadership is not about want, it is about necessity. Someone must make the difficult decisions. Someone must bear the weight of consequences. If not you, then who? I want to protect people, Naruto said finally. If that means leading, then I'll lead. If it means making hard choices, I'll make them. If it means being someone my friends don't quite recognize anymore. He trailed off, the words hanging unfinished in the salt air. Then that's the price you'll pay, Kakashi finished softly. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the boats navigate their new route to prosperity. In the distance, Naruto could see Sasuke and Sakura helping the villagers with final construction tasks, their movements easy and familiar. His teammates, his friends, people who trusted him despite the growing strangeness in his behavior. People who depend on you to keep them alive. Remember that when the temptation to be normal becomes too strong. Kakashi-sensei, Naruto said eventually, what happens when someone changes so much that they're not really the same person anymore? The question clearly caught his instructor off guard. What do you mean? I mean. Naruto struggled to find words for something he barely understood himself. What if the person I'm becoming isn't someone I like very much? What if being effective means being someone my friends have reasons to fear? A valid concern. But consider, would you rather be loved by corpses or feared by the living? The thought was so cold, so calculated, that it made Naruto shiver. When had he started thinking like that? I think, Kakashi said slowly, that the most dangerous thing isn't becoming someone different. It's becoming someone who stops caring about the consequences of their actions. Incorrect. The most dangerous thing is allowing emotional attachment to compromise tactical effectiveness. But even as the analytical voice offered its correction, Naruto found himself clinging to Kakashi's words. Because somewhere underneath all the tactical knowledge and strategic thinking, he was still the boy who just wanted to be acknowledged. Still the kid who dreamed of being Hokage because he wanted to protect everyone he cared about. The question was whether that boy would survive whatever he was becoming. We should head back, Kakashi said eventually. The others will be wondering where we are. As they walked back toward the village, Naruto caught sight of his reflection in the water below. For just a moment, he could have sworn he saw someone else looking back, older, wearing robes instead of orange jumpsuit, with eyes that held the weight of absolute authority. Then the water rippled, and there was only Naruto Uzumaki, 12-year-old genin of Kono Hagakure. But the image lingered in his mind like a promise, or a warning. The transformation has begun, the voice whispered as they rejoined his teammates. The only question now is whether you'll fight it or embrace it. Watching Sasuke and Sakura laugh at something Tsunade had said, seeing the easy trust in their faces when they looked at him, Naruto thought he knew which way he was leaning. He just wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. The great Naruto bridge stretched behind them, a monument to what could be accomplished when someone was willing to make the hard choices. Even if those choices changed them into someone they barely recognized. The Chunin exams had a particular smell to them, sweat, fear, and the metallic tang of barely controlled violence. Standing in the preliminary arena beneath Konoha's tower, surrounded by genin from villages that viewed each other with varying degrees of suspicion, Naruto found himself cataloging potential threats with disturbing precision. 21 combatants remaining. Skill levels vary from adequate to exceptional. Political considerations. Sand siblings represent significant threat assessment. Sound genin are unknown variables. Konoha teams show standard training protocols with notable exceptions. Nervous? Sakura asked, though her own voice carried a tremor that suggested she was projecting. No, Naruto replied, and realized it was true. The old Naruto would have been bouncing off the walls with excitement and terror. This Naruto felt only a cold anticipation, like a chess player studying the board before making his opening move. Because you've done this before. Different setting, different stakes, but the fundamental challenge remains. Demonstrate superiority without revealing true capabilities. From the balcony above, the third Hokage watched the proceedings with the kind of paternal interest that had once made Naruto feel warm and acknowledged. Now meeting those knowing eyes, Naruto felt like a specimen under examination. The first match, announced the proctor, a sickly-looking jounin whose coughing fits didn't disguise the casual competence in his movements. Naruto Uzumaki vs. Kiba Inuzuka. Opponent assessment. Animal partnership combatant, enhanced sensory capabilities, above-average taijutsu. Weaknesses: overconfidence, predictable attack patterns, emotional attachment to companion animal. Kiba dropped into the arena with his usual cocky grin, Akamaru perched on his head like a furry crown. "This'll be quick," he announced to no one in particular. Dead, last versus the future alpha of Konoha. Not even a contest. Psychological warfare attempt, crude but potentially effective against opponents with fragile confidence. Respond appropriately. "You're right," Naruto said quietly, his voice carrying just enough to reach the spectators. "It won't be a contest." Something in his tone made Kiba's grin falter slightly. Around the arena, conversations quieted as people focused on the exchange with newfound interest. "Fighters ready," the proctor called. Naruto settled into a stance that wasn't quite anything they'd taught at the academy. His weight distribution was perfect, his posture relaxed but ready to explode into motion. It was the combat posture of someone who'd fought hundreds of battles and learned from each one. "When did you learn to stand like that?" came Sasuke's thought from above, though Naruto somehow knew his teammate was thinking it. "Begin," Kiba moved first, as expected. The fang over fang technique was flashy, effective, and utterly predictable to anyone who understood its mechanics. He and Akamaru became spinning drills of death, tearing across the arena floor with impressive speed. Naruto stepped sideways, not dodged, not leaped, simply moved 2 feet to his left with casual precision, letting the attack whistle past him by inches. The displacement was so minimal that it looked almost accidental, except for the way he immediately flowed into a counterattack that caught Kiba at the exact moment his technique ended. Timing? Everything in combat comes down to timing. The strike wasn't particularly powerful, just a simple palm thrust to the solar plexus, but it was placed with surgical precision at the exact instant when Kiba was most vulnerable. The Inuzuka boy folded like a paper crane, gasping for air as he crashed into the far wall. "What?" Kiba wheezed, struggling to stand. "How did you telegraph your attacks," Naruto replied conversationally, not even breathing hard. "The muscle tension, the slight weight shift before you launch, it's all visible if you know what to look for." Accurate analysis. Also demonstrates tactical thinking that will impress observers while establishing dominance. Akamaru barked frantically and launched himself at Naruto's back, tiny fangs bared. Without turning around, Naruto reached up and caught the puppy gently but firmly, his hand closing around the small body with perfect control. "Easy," he murmured, and something in his voice made Akamaru stop struggling immediately. "I'm not going to hurt you." Interesting. The animal recognizes you as a superior predator. Instinctive submission response. "How?" Kiba pushed himself to his feet, his face pale with shock and something that might have been fear. "You moved like you knew exactly what I was going to do." "I did." Naruto set Akamaru down carefully, and the puppy immediately ran back to his partner. "You've been using the same attack patterns since the academy. Same setup, same execution, same recovery. Effective against opponents who panic, but..." He shrugged, the gesture carrying more dismissal than any insult could have. "Psychological dominance established. Opponent demoralized, conclude efficiently." "Come at me again," Naruto said, settling back into that perfect combat stance. "But this time, try something I haven't seen before." The challenge hung in the air like a dare. Kiba's face flushed with anger and embarrassment, his hands forming the familiar seals for his clan's techniques. The second exchange lasted exactly 3 seconds. Kiba came in low and fast, trying a different angle of attack. Naruto sidestepped again, but this time his counter wasn't a single strike. It was a flowing combination that targeted specific pressure points with mathematical precision. Not to cause lasting damage, but to temporarily disrupt motor control. Kiba collapsed like his strings had been cut, his limbs refusing to respond properly. Winner: Naruto Uzumaki. The announcement echoed through an arena that had gone completely silent. Above them, Naruto could feel the weight of dozens of stares, but the one that mattered most came from the Hokage's box. The old man sees too much. You've revealed capabilities that exceed your supposed training level. Damage control required. Good fight, Naruto said to Kiba, extending a hand to help him up. The gesture was meant to appear generous, but it also allowed him to apply a subtle pressure point technique that would restore normal motor function. "What did you do to me?" Kiba whispered as sensation returned to his limbs. "Nerve clusters," Naruto replied quietly. "Temporary paralysis. You'll be fine in a few minutes." "Where did you learn pressure point manipulation?" The question came from multiple sources: teammates, instructors, spectators who'd recognized the technique for what it was. Advanced medical knowledge combined with precise combat application, the kind of skill that took years to develop. "I read a lot," Naruto said, the excuse feeling more hollow each time he used it. An hour later, he stood in the Hokage's private office, feeling uncomfortably like a student called to the principal's office. Except this principal could level mountains and had been watching him with increasingly sharp attention since the wave mission. "Sit," Hiruzen said gently, gesturing to a chair that had probably witnessed more important conversations than Naruto could imagine. The third Hokage looked older than Naruto remembered, the lines on his face deeper, his movements carrying the careful deliberation of someone whose body was beginning to fail him. But his eyes were as sharp as ever, and they missed nothing. "That was an impressive display," Hiruzen said, settling behind his desk with a soft sigh. "Kiba is a competent fighter, but you dismantled his entire strategy without breaking a sweat." He's probing for explanations. "Offer plausible deflection without arousing additional suspicion." "He was predictable," Naruto replied. "I've watched him fight dozens of times at the academy, same techniques, same patterns." Hiruzen lifted his pipe from the desk but didn't light it. "And the pressure point technique, that's advanced medical knowledge. Where did you learn it?" The question hung between them like a test. Naruto could feel the weight of the old man's attention, the sense that his answer would determine something important. "I've been studying," he said finally. "After the wave mission, I realized how much I don't know, how unprepared I was." Partial truth, the most effective form of deception. "Studying what exactly?" Hiruzen's voice remained gentle, but there was steel underneath it now. "Because what you demonstrated today suggests knowledge that goes well beyond anything we teach genin." Dangerous territory. "He suspects you're not what you appear to be. Medical texts mostly, combat theory, strategy guides." Naruto met the Hokage's eyes steadily. "I want to be strong enough to protect my friends. That means understanding how the human body works, how people think, how battles are really won." It was true in its way, just not the whole truth. Hiruzen studied him for a long moment, then set his pipe aside entirely. "Naruto, I've known you since you were born. I've watched you grow, celebrated your victories, worried over your struggles. You were always special, but lately..." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Lately, you've been different, more focused, more calculating. Your teammates have mentioned it, your instructors have noticed, even your fighting style has changed." He's building to a direct confrontation, prepare defensive measures. "People change," Naruto said, echoing words he'd spoken to Sasuke weeks ago. "Sometimes the change is just more obvious than usual." "Yes, they do," Hiruzen agreed. "But the change is in you. They're not gradual adaptation. They're fundamental shifts in personality, in capability, in the way you approach problems. That's not normal development, Naruto. That's something else entirely." The silence stretched between them, loaded with implications. Naruto felt the familiar weight of the analytical voice, offering tactical options and strategic responses. But underneath that, he felt something else, a desperate longing for the simple trust he'd once shared with this kind old man. "Tell him the truth," part of him whispered. "He cares about you. He'll understand." "Absolutely not," the analytical voice countered. "Truth creates vulnerabilities. Information is a weapon, never give it to potential enemies." "What if I told you," Naruto said slowly, "that sometimes I remember things that never happened to me? That I have knowledge I never learned, skills I never practiced?" Hiruzen's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. A subtle tension that suggested he was taking this conversation very seriously indeed. I would say, the Hokage replied carefully, that such things have been known to happen. Bloodline abilities can manifest in unexpected ways. Trauma can unlock hidden potential. And in your case, he gestured vaguely, but they both knew what he meant. The Nine Tails. The demon fox sealed within Naruto's body with all the unknown consequences that entailed. The seal has always been stable, Hiruzen continued, but it's possible that as you mature, certain interactions are beginning to manifest. He's offering you an explanation. Accept it gratefully. Maybe that's it, Naruto said, relief evident in his voice. Maybe the fox is sharing memories somehow, knowledge from all the battles it's seen. It wasn't exactly a lie. The Nine Tails had been sealed for 12 years, had experienced countless battles through the shinobi it had faced. If those memories were somehow bleeding through, that would explain the tactical sophistication, Hiruzen mused. The Nine Tails has faced some of the most skilled fighters in history. If fragments of those encounters were somehow accessible to you, excellent. He's convinced himself of a plausible explanation. Your secret remains secure. But as Naruto nodded agreement, he felt something twist in his chest. Not relief at the successful deception, but guilt at lying to someone who genuinely cared about him. Guilt is a luxury you cannot afford. Leadership requires difficult choices, including deception when necessary for operational security. A knock at the door interrupted his internal debate. "Come in," Hiruzen called. The door opened to reveal a figure that made Naruto's breath catch, tall, white-haired, with the kind of presence that filled rooms just by existing. Jiraiya of the Sannin stood in the doorway, his expression casual but his eyes sharp as they fixed on Naruto. Recognition protocols activated. Jiraiya, S-rank combatant, intelligence operative, seal master, author of questionable literature. Potential mentor figure or significant threat, depending on political alignment. "So this is the kid everyone's talking about," Jiraiya said, his voice carrying the easy confidence of someone who'd never met a challenge he couldn't eventually overcome. "The one who's been causing such interesting ripples. He knows. Everyone knows you've revealed too much too quickly." "Ripples," Naruto managed. A genin who fights like a seasoned tactical commander. Shadow clone coordination that rivals elite jounin techniques. Strategic thinking that impresses veteran instructors. Jiraiya stepped into the office, his presence somehow making the spacious room feel smaller. "That tends to attract attention in our line of work." Threat assessment. "Extremely dangerous. Capable of seeing through deception. Approach with extreme caution." But underneath the analytical evaluation, Naruto felt something else stirring, recognition that had nothing to do with tactical assessment. This man felt familiar, not in the way of recovered memories, but in the deeper sense of meeting someone who shared fundamental understanding. "He's like you," the voice whispered with something approaching surprise. "A leader. Someone who bears responsibility for others, someone who understands the weight of command." "Naruto," Hiruzen said gently, "I'd like you to meet Jiraiya. He's an old friend. And perhaps someone who can help you understand what's happening to you." Jiraiya's eyes crinkled with what might have been amusement. "Help, kid, if half of what I've heard is true, you might be the one helping me learn a few things." Interesting response. He's not treating you as a student to be instructed, but as an equal to be evaluated. "What kind of things?" Naruto asked, genuine curiosity coloring his voice. "Leadership," Jiraiya said simply. "Command. What it means to be responsible for other people's lives." His expression grew more serious. "It's not something most 12-year-olds have to worry about, but then again, you're not most 12-year-olds, are you?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Naruto felt the familiar weight of choices, maintain the deception, or risk honesty with someone who might actually understand. "He sees you," the voice noted with clinical interest. "Not the mask you wear, but what you're becoming underneath. This could be valuable, or dangerous." "No," Naruto said finally, meeting Jiraiya's knowing gaze. "I don't think I am." As the three of them stood in the Hokage's office, the aging leader, the legendary sage, and the boy who was rapidly becoming something else entirely, Naruto realized that his transformation was entering a new phase. He just wasn't sure if that was something to anticipate or fear. "Both," the voice whispered as afternoon shadows lengthened across the village. "Always both." Outside the window, Konoha spread below them like a living map, full of people who trusted their leaders to keep them safe. The weight of that trust was becoming heavier every day. The explosion that shattered the arena's peace came exactly 17 minutes into Sasuke's match with Gaara. Naruto knew the precise timing because he'd been counting. His attention split between the psychological drama unfolding below and the subtle positioning of what he'd identified as enemy operatives throughout the stadium. The feathers that began falling from the sky looked like a celebration to most observers. To him, they looked like the opening move of a carefully orchestrated military operation. Mass genjutsu deployment. Sleep-inducing technique designed to incapacitate civilian population and lower-tier combatants. Standard opening for large-scale assault. Around him, spectators began slumping in their seats as the illusion took hold. But Naruto remained standing, his mind working with mechanical precision as he analyzed the unfolding situation. Primary objective, civilian evacuation and protection. Secondary objective, neutralize enemy forces. Tertiary objective, coordinate defensive response. Kai! Sakura's voice cut through the falling feathers as she dispelled the genjutsu affecting herself and several nearby civilians. Good, Naruto said, his voice carrying an authority that made his teammate turn immediately. Start waking people up and getting them to the emergency shelters. Prioritize families with children. When did you learn evacuation protocols? Sakura's confused expression asked, but she nodded and began shaking unconscious spectators awake. Above them, the battle between Orochimaru and the third Hokage was beginning in earnest. Naruto could see the purple barrier containing their fight, could feel the massive chakra signatures clashing like thunderstorms. But his attention was already shifting to more immediate concerns. The Hokage is engaged with the primary threat. That leaves command structure disrupted and lower-level threats unmanaged. Someone needs to coordinate the overall defensive response. Shikamaru, Naruto's command voice carried across the stadium chaos. You're with me, we need to organize evacuation routes. The Nara heir looked up from where he'd been helping his father wake sleeping clan members. Naruto, what's? No time to explain, trust me. Naruto was already moving, his shadow clones appearing around the stadium with tactical precision. Not random copies, but specialized units with specific assignments. Formation Gamma 7, Civilian Protection Protocols. Where did you learn military formations? This time the question came from multiple sources, teammates, instructors, even some of the adult ninja who were beginning to respond to the crisis. But Naruto was beyond caring about explanations. People were in danger, and he had the knowledge to help them. The analytical part of his mind was already processing the situation with devastating clarity. Enemy forces. Approximately 200 sound and sand ninja infiltrating the village. Estimated civilian casualties without proper coordination, 4–60%. With optimal defensive organization, 8–12%. The numbers were cold, clinical, and absolutely unacceptable. Clone Company Alpha, secure the primary evacuation routes to the northern shelters, he called out, his voice carrying with the kind of projection that came from addressing large groups. Beta Company, establish defensive perimeters around medical facilities. Charlie Company, coordinate with AA Chenbu for threat assessment and elimination. Around the stadium, his shadow clones moved with purpose that shocked everyone watching. They weren't acting like copies of an academy graduate. They were functioning like a trained military unit, each one moving with tactical awareness and strategic positioning. This is impossible, came Lee's amazed whisper from nearby. Shadow clones cannot maintain such complex coordination patterns. Correct. Standard shadow clones cannot, but yours are different now, aren't they? The voice was right. Somehow, his clones had evolved beyond simple replication. They retained tactical knowledge, could make independent decisions within their assigned parameters, could coordinate with each other like soldiers who'd trained together for years. When did this change happen? When you stopped thinking of them as copies and started thinking of them as subordinates. Naruto. Kakashi appeared beside him in a swirl of leaves, his visible eye wide with something that looked like shock. What are you doing? Damage control, Naruto replied without looking away from his mental map of the unfolding situation. The command structure is compromised. Someone needs to coordinate defensive response. That someone should be the Jounin commanders, not a genin. He's right, of course. By all normal protocols, you should defer to senior authority. But the senior authorities are either unconscious, engaged with primary threats, or scattered throughout the village. The Jounin commanders are either fighting S-rank opponents or dealing with infiltrators, Naruto said, his tone carrying the patient explanation of someone stating obvious facts. Coordinated response requires someone with tactical overview and available assets. He gestured to his clones, who were now efficiently organizing civilian evacuation while establishing defensive positions. I have both. Kakashi stared at him for a long moment. Those formation callouts, the strategic positioning, where later, Naruto interrupted, a part of him amazed at his own audacity in cutting off a Jounin instructor. Right now, we have bigger problems. He pointed toward the forest, where a massive cloud of dust and destruction was moving rapidly toward the village. Gaara's lost control. Full Biju transformation, heading directly for populated areas. Threat assessment, one-tailed Shukaku, partial manifestation. Estimated casualties without intervention. 200-400 civilian deaths, 50-100 military casualties. The numbers hit him like physical blows. All those people, all those lives that would be lost if someone didn't act. You could stop it. You have the tactical knowledge, the strategic thinking, the raw power. You could coordinate a response that minimizes casualties. But, Naruto whispered, because he could hear the hesitation in his own thoughts. But it would require revealing capabilities that cannot be explained away. It would require dropping the pretense that you're just a talented genin. Around him, chaos was spreading as more enemy ninja revealed themselves. Explosions echoed from various parts of the village. Smoke rose from burning buildings. People were dying while he stood there weighing political considerations against immediate necessity. The choice, when it came, felt inevitable. Kakashi-sensei, Naruto said, his voice carrying absolute certainty. I need you to trust me. Naruto, I know how to stop this, all of it, but I need you to trust me and not ask questions until later. Their eyes met across the chaos. In Kakashi's single visible eye, Naruto saw confusion, concern, and something that might have been fear. But underneath all of that, he saw the recognition that sometimes trust had to come before understanding. Do it, Kakashi said simply. Excellent. Operational authority granted, initiating full tactical coordination. Naruto closed his eyes and extended his senses, feeling for every shadow clone throughout the village. When he opened them again, his voice carried the kind of absolute authority that made grown ninja stop what they were doing to listen. All units, this is command. Implementing Emergency Protocol 7. Civilian evacuation is now secondary priority. Primary focus shifts to threat containment and elimination. Throughout Konoha, his clones began moving with inhuman coordination. Not as individuals, but as components of a larger tactical organism directed by a single strategic intelligence. Company Alpha, establish containment perimeter around Shukaku manifestation. Do not engage directly, focus on evacuation of potential casualties. Company Beta, coordinate with Hokage Guard to secure critical infrastructure. Priority targets, hospital, academy, weapons depot. Company Charlie, hunter-killer operations against infiltrating enemy forces. Rules of engagement, lethal force authorized. The last command sent a chill through him, but the tactical necessity was undeniable. Enemy combatants in civilian areas weren't prisoners to be captured, they were immediate threats to be eliminated. You're thinking like a military commander now. No room for sentiment when lives hang in the balance. Naruto, Sakura's voice carried a note of alarm as she watched his clones shift into what could only be described as assault formations. What's happening to you? But he was already moving, his body flowing through the stadium crowd with the kind of tactical awareness that let him find the optimal path through chaos. Behind him, his teammates and Kakashi followed, but he could feel their confusion like a weight on his shoulders. They don't understand. How could they? They've never had to coordinate large-scale military operations. They've never had to make decisions that determine whether hundreds of people live or die. The forest clearing where Sasuke was fighting Gaara had become a crater. The half-transformed Shukaku towered above the trees, its sand body radiating malevolent joy as it prepared to demonstrate why Biju were considered strategic weapons. There, Sakura pointed toward a figure hanging unconscious from a tree branch. Sasuke, primary teammate in immediate danger. Rescue takes priority over strategic objectives. But even as part of him focused on Sasuke's predicament, the larger part of his mind was calculating attack vectors, analyzing the Biju's movement patterns, coordinating the response of shadow clones throughout the village. This is what command feels like, holding dozens of variables in your mind simultaneously, making decisions that ripple across an entire battlefield. Gaara, Naruto called out, his voice somehow carrying over the creature's roaring. I want to talk, the sand demon's massive head turned toward him, yellow eyes focusing with predatory interest. Another insect comes to die, No, not an insect, something else entirely. I know what you are, Naruto said, his voice steady despite the crushing presence of the Biju's chakra. I know what it feels like to carry something inside you that everyone fears. Psychological warfare. Find the human core underneath the monster. Address the emotional dysfunction rather than the tactical threat. You know nothing, Gaara's voice, distorted by the Shukaku's influence, cracked with pain and rage. You have friends. People who care about you. I have only the monster. There, the core issue. Not power or territory or revenge, loneliness. The same driving force that shaped your own early development. That's where you're wrong, Naruto said, and his shadow clones began appearing around the clearing. Not in attack formation, but in a loose circle that somehow managed to be both non-threatening and strategically positioned. I didn't always have friends. I was alone for a long time. Hated, feared. Connect with his experience. Establish emotional commonality before attempting behavioral modification. But I learned something, Naruto continued, taking a step closer to the towering sand construct. The monster inside you, it doesn't have to define who you are. You can choose to be something else. Oversimplification. Biju integration requires extensive psychological work and often decades of careful development. But the core principle is sound. Choose. Gaara's laugh was bitter and broken. I didn't choose anything. I was made into this. Shaped into a weapon, trauma response, externalized locus of control, he genuinely believes he has no agency over his actions. So was I, Naruto replied quietly. But here I am talking to you instead of trying to kill you. That's a choice. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sounds of battle echoing from the village. Gaara's massive sand form wavered, the Shukaku's influence flickering as the human core reasserted itself. Psychological penetration successful. He's listening now rather than simply reacting. How? Gaara whispered, and for a moment he sounded like what he was, a 13-year-old boy who'd never learned how to be human. How do you choose to be different? The real question. This is where you either save him or lose him entirely. You start by deciding that other people matter, Naruto said, extending his hand toward the diminishing sand construct. That their pain is real, their lives have value. That maybe, just maybe, you're not the only one who's afraid. Empathy development, cognitive restructuring, basic therapeutic technique adapted for battlefield application. For a long moment, Gaara stared at the offered hand. The Shukaku's form continued to dissolve around him, sand streaming away like water until only an exhausted boy remained, suspended in the air by rapidly failing chakra. Then he fell. Naruto caught him, of course. The analytical part of his mind had calculated the trajectory and positioned him accordingly. But the emotional part, the part that was still just Naruto Uzumaki, felt the trembling in Gaara's shoulders and recognized it for what it was. Not just physical exhaustion, psychological breakthrough, he's experiencing empathy for the first time in years. Thank you, Gaara whispered against his shoulder. I had forgotten what it felt like to not be afraid. Mission accomplished. Threat neutralized through psychological intervention rather than force. Casualty assessment, 0 friendly casualties, minimal collateral damage. But as Naruto held the broken boy who'd been shaped into a weapon, he felt something cold settle in his stomach. Because he understood with crystal clarity exactly how easy it would be to become what Gaara had been. The line between protector and monster is thinner than most people realize. Remember that. Around them, his shadow clones were dispersing as the immediate threat passed. Throughout the village, emergency response teams were dealing with the aftermath of the invasion. Soon, there would be questions about his tactical coordination, about capabilities that exceeded anything a genin should possess. Your secret is becoming harder to maintain. Eventually, you'll have to choose between effectiveness and anonymity. Naruto, Kakashi appeared beside them, his expression unreadable. The Hokage wants to see you. Immediately, something in his tone made Naruto's heart skip. He's alive, Kakashi said quickly, but his voice carried a weight that suggested complications. But the battle with Orochimaru. There were consequences, political ramifications. Your enhanced coordination during the crisis has attracted attention at the highest levels. As they made their way back toward the village, Gaara walking quietly beside them and his teammates shooting him confused looks, Naruto felt the familiar weight of choices approaching. He'd saved lives today, hundreds of them, through tactical coordination that shouldn't have been possible for someone his age. But in doing so, he'd revealed capabilities that raised uncomfortable questions about who and what he really was. The transformation accelerates. Soon, you'll have to decide whether you're Naruto Uzumaki pretending to be something more, or something more pretending to be Naruto Uzumaki. Looking back at the forest where he talked to Jinchuriki down from the edge of destruction, Naruto thought he already knew which way that choice was heading. He just wasn't sure if that was something to celebrate or mourn. Both, the voice whispered as they approached the Hokage Tower. Always both. Behind them, the sun was setting over Konoha, painting the sky the color of blood and transformation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, new choices about the person he was becoming. But tonight, hundreds of people would go home to their families because he'd been willing to become something other than what he'd been. Sometimes that had to be enough. The third Hokage's office smelled wrong. Not the familiar combination of tobacco smoke and old paper that had always made Naruto feel safe, but something sharper. Medical antiseptic couldn't quite mask the metallic tang that meant serious injury. And the way everyone moved with careful, quiet, suggested things were far worse than anyone wanted to admit. Hiruzen lay propped up in his chair, his breathing shallow and labored. The legendary professor looked every one of his 68 years, his face pale and drawn with the kind of exhaustion that came from pushing aging chakra coils beyond their limits. "Ah, Naruto," the old man wheezed, managing a weak smile that didn't hide the pain in his eyes. "I hear you coordinated quite the defensive response today." Assessment. Severe chakra exhaustion, internal injuries, possible organ damage. Estimated survival probability without immediate S-class medical intervention, 12%. The cold analysis hit Naruto like a physical blow. 12%. The Hokage, the man who'd been his anchor point, his first real acknowledgement, the closest thing to a grandfather he'd ever known, was dying. "Hokage-sama," Naruto said, his voice coming out rougher than intended. "How bad is it?" Hiruzen's smile became more genuine. "Direct as always, I appreciate that about you." He gestured weakly to the medical ninja hovering nearby. "The battle with Orochimaru required techniques I haven't used in decades. My body paid the price." Translation: he overextended himself protecting the village. Standard leadership sacrifice scenario, acceptable losses in service of strategic objectives. The clinical assessment made Naruto feel sick. There was nothing acceptable about this. "Can't they heal you?" he pressed, ignoring the warning look from the medical ninja. "There has to be something. Some wounds go deeper than chakra can reach," Hiruzen interrupted gently. "But that's not why you're here." His eyes sharpened despite his obvious pain. "Your performance during the invasion was remarkable. The tactical coordination you displayed, the strategic thinking, it saved hundreds of lives." Of course it did. Proper command structure prevents unnecessary casualties. Basic military principle. It also raised questions, Kakashi added from his position by the window. Questions that need answers. The room fell silent except for Hiruzen's labored breathing. Naruto could feel the weight of multiple stares, the sense that this conversation would determine something important about his future. "They suspect you're not what you appear to be. Choose your response carefully." "What kind of questions?" Naruto asked, though part of him already knew. "The kind that wonder how a 12-year-old genin developed command capabilities that rival veteran Jounin," came a new voice from the doorway. Jiraiya stepped into the office, his usual jovial expression replaced by something more serious. Behind him came two figures that made Naruto's analytical mind immediately shift into threat assessment mode. Hamura Mitokado and Koharu Udatane. Village elders, political authorities, potential obstacles to operational freedom. "The boy showed tactical acumen during a crisis," Hamura said, his tone carrying the particular brand of suspicion that came with decades of political maneuvering. "That could be explained by stress response, natural talent, even the Nine Tails influence. But the coordination patterns he used," Koharu continued, "those were military formations. Specific command structures that aren't taught to genin or even most jounin. They've analyzed the tactical deployment, impressive intelligence gathering for civilian administrators." "Where," Hamura asked bluntly, "did you learn advanced military strategy?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Naruto felt his teammates tense beside him, could see the confusion and growing worry in their faces. They wanted to defend him, but how could they explain something they didn't understand themselves? Truth would create more problems than it solved. Deflection is required. "I didn't learn it," Naruto said finally. "It just felt right. Like I'd done it before." "Felt right," Koharu's voice carried skeptical disbelief. You coordinated over 200 shadow clones in complex tactical formations because it felt right. They're not going to accept simple deflection. More substantial explanation required. The Nine Tails, Jiraiya said quietly, and something in his tone made everyone turn toward him. Naruto, the seal has been showing unusual fluctuations lately. We've been monitoring it since the wave mission. Convenient scapegoat, accept the explanation gratefully. Fluctuations? Naruto asked, genuine concern coloring his voice. Nothing dangerous, Hiruzen assured him quickly. But the fox has been more active. It's possible that some of its memories, its accumulated experience from decades of conflict, are beginning to bleed through. Plausible. The Nine Tails would have absorbed tactical knowledge from every ninja it faced, if that information was somehow becoming accessible. That would explain the sudden strategic sophistication, Hamura mused. The fox has encountered some of the most skilled commanders in ninja history. It was a good explanation, almost believable. The only problem was that Naruto could feel the Nine Tails' actual presence in the back of his mind, and it was utterly separate from the voice that had been guiding his tactical development. Different sources, different knowledge bases. The fox's influence is raw power and instinct. Your capabilities stem from somewhere else entirely, but he couldn't say that, not without raising even more dangerous questions. Maybe that's it, he said instead, relief evident in his voice. I've been having strange dreams lately, memories that don't feel like mine. Partial truth, the most effective form of deception. The adults exchanged meaningful looks, clearly communicating in the shorthand of people who'd worked together for decades. Finally, Hiruzen spoke. Regardless of the source, your actions today saved lives. The village is in your debt. His breathing grew more labored. But there are consequences to revealing such capabilities. Political ramifications. Enhanced scrutiny, elevated expectations, potential reassignment to more dangerous duties. What kind of consequences? Sasuke asked, speaking up for the first time. The kind that mean Naruto can't go back to being just another genin, Jiraiya replied bluntly. Word is already spreading about the tactical prodigy who coordinated the village's defense. That kind of reputation carries weight and responsibility. Transition point reached. Your cover identity as a simple genin is no longer sustainable. What does that mean practically? Kakashi asked. Hiruzen tried to sit up straighter, wincing with the effort. It means Naruto will need specialized training. Someone who can help him understand and control these new capabilities. His eyes fixed on Jiraiya with unmistakable intent, someone with experience in unusual cases. They want Jiraiya to take you as an apprentice. Evaluation, positive development. His training would provide legitimate explanation for rapid capability advancement. Now wait just a minute, Jiraiya protested, raising his hands defensively. I never agreed to. You're the only one qualified, Hiruzen interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of a final command. These abilities need proper guidance or they could become dangerous. To Naruto and to everyone around him. True assessment. Uncontrolled power development leads to catastrophic failures. You need mentorship to maintain operational security. The room fell quiet again, broken only by the third Hokage's increasingly difficult breathing. Naruto could see the pain etched in every line of the old man's face, could hear the wet rattle that meant internal bleeding. He's dying. Right here, right now, and there's nothing you can do about it. The thought hit him harder than any enemy attack. This man had believed in him when no one else would, had protected him, guided him, shown him kindness when the rest of the village saw only a monster. And he was dying because he'd fought to save everyone else. This is what leadership costs. The strong sacrifice themselves to protect the weak. It's the natural order. No, Naruto said aloud, surprising everyone in the room. No what? Hiruzen asked gently. No, you don't get to die. The words came out fierce and determined, carrying an authority that made several adults take a step back. Not when I can prevent it. You cannot prevent death through force of will alone. Accept the tactical reality and adapt accordingly. But the analytical voice was wrong. There were options, possibilities that the purely tactical mind didn't consider because they required thinking beyond conventional parameters. Medical ninjutsu, part of his mind, whispered. Advanced healing techniques. Cellular regeneration protocols. The knowledge came from nowhere and everywhere, flooding his consciousness with procedures and methodologies that shouldn't have existed in his world. Complex medical applications that combined chakra manipulation with theoretical frameworks that felt almost like magic. Medical magic adapted for chakra-based healing systems. Naruto, Kakashi said carefully, what are you thinking? Before he could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the building. The sharp, urgent sound that meant immediate crisis, emergency response required. What now? Jiraiya muttered, moving toward the window. Through the glass, they could see Chenbu operatives racing across the village rooftops, their movements carrying the urgency of people responding to catastrophic threat. Report, Hamura barked at a medical ninja who just burst through the door. The Hokage's injuries are worse than we thought, the woman gasped. Internal hemorrhaging, organ failure, he's going into shock. We need Lady Tsunade now, Tsunade Senju. Legendary medical ninja, world's greatest healer, currently missing and presumed to be avoiding all political responsibility. Where is she? Koharu demanded. Unknown. Intelligence suggests she might be in the land of fire's gambling districts, but I'll find her, Naruto interrupted, his voice carrying absolute certainty. Everyone turned to stare at him. Naruto, Hiruzen wheezed, finding Tsunade isn't a mission for. I'll find her, he repeated, and this time his tone brooked no argument. Because losing you isn't acceptable. Emotional attachment compromising tactical judgment. The third Hokage's survival or death doesn't significantly impact your long-term objectives. The thought was so cold, so calculating, that it made him physically sick. When had he started thinking like that? When had people become variables in strategic equations rather than individuals who mattered? When you became capable of saving them all? Sentiment is a luxury commanders cannot afford. Find her how? Jiraiya asked, but his tone suggested genuine curiosity rather than dismissal. Naruto closed his eyes, extending his senses in ways that felt both foreign and familiar. Chakra signatures, emotional resonances, the subtle patterns that connected all living things in networks of cause and effect. Information gathering through enhanced sensory awareness. Tracking protocols based on psychological profiling rather than physical evidence. When he opened his eyes, they held knowledge that hadn't been there moments before. She's running, he said simply. From responsibility, from expectations, from the possibility of failing someone she cares about. People like that go to places where they can lose themselves, gambling houses, taverns, anywhere that offers distraction from their own thoughts. Accurate psychological assessment. Also demonstrates analytical capabilities that far exceed normal parameters. That describes half the establishments in the Fire Country, Hamura pointed out. But she's not just running from responsibility, Naruto continued, his voice taking on the cadence of someone working through a complex problem. She's running from medical cases, from people who need her skills, so she'll avoid anywhere that might put her in contact with serious injuries. Therefore, urban areas with good medical facilities are unlikely. Rural locations with high accident rates are also contraindicated. Focus on entertainment districts with low injury probability. Tanzaku Town, Jiraiya said suddenly, understanding dawning in his voice. The gambling capital, far enough from major medical centers that she won't encounter many serious cases, but with enough distractions to keep her occupied. Correct analysis. Also demonstrates that Jiraiya possesses similar psychological profiling capabilities. We leave in an hour, Naruto announced, then caught himself. I mean, if that's acceptable to, we leave in an hour, Hiruzen confirmed weakly. Jiraiya, go with him, keep him safe, and evaluate his capabilities under field conditions. Standard operational protocol for asset assessment. As the adults began organizing the search mission, Naruto found himself studying the dying Hokage with new eyes. This man had spent decades making impossible decisions, bearing the weight of an entire village's well-being, sacrificing pieces of himself for the greater good. This is what you're becoming, someone who carries that kind of responsibility. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like coming home, because you've done this before. In different circumstances, with different stakes, but the fundamental challenge remains. How much of yourself are you willing to sacrifice to protect what matters? Hokage-sama, Naruto said quietly as the others prepared to leave. I won't let you down. Hiruzen's smile was warm despite his obvious pain. You never have, Naruto. That's what makes this so difficult. What makes what difficult? But before he could ask, medical ninja were rushing in with emergency equipment, and the room dissolved into controlled chaos. As he and Jiraiya prepared to leave for what might be the most important mission of his life, Naruto felt the familiar weight of choices settling on his shoulders. Save the Hokage, find Tsunade, convince her to return. Simple objectives that would require him to become even more of what he was already turning into. Someone who could manipulate, coordinate, command, someone who could bear the weight of other people's lives without breaking. Someone who was rapidly ceasing to be Naruto Uzumaki and becoming something else entirely. The question was whether that transformation was salvation or damnation. Both, the voice whispered as they leaped from the Hokage tower into the gathering darkness. Always both. Behind them, the third Hokage fought for his life, sustained only by the promise that help was coming. Ahead of them lay Tsunade Senju, the world's greatest medical ninja, who had spent years running from exactly the kind of responsibility Naruto was learning to embrace. The collision between them would determine not just the Hokage's fate, but the final shape of whatever Naruto was becoming. Tanzaku Town at midnight was a carnival of vice and desperation. Neon lights bled color across rain-slicked streets, casting everything in garish hues that made the shadows seem deeper by contrast. The air tasted of sake, sweat, and the particular brand of hope that only came from believing the next bet would change everything. Naruto found it perfectly disgusting. Assessment: prime environment for individuals seeking to avoid responsibility through sensory overload. Optimal hunting ground for targets exhibiting avoidance behaviors. "She's here," he said with absolute certainty, scanning the crowded streets with eyes that cataloged every detail. "Third gambling house from the main intersection, upper floor, private room." Jiraiya paused mid-step. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because you understand psychology now. Because you can read the patterns that drive human behavior like a military manual." "Process of elimination," Naruto replied, though that wasn't quite true. "Someone with her skill level and reputation wouldn't gamble in public areas, too much chance of recognition. But she needs the noise, the chaos. Private room gives her isolation with background distraction." It was a good explanation, logical and reasonable. It also didn't explain how he could somehow feel her presence like a weight in the air. Sense the particular combination of guilt and defiance that radiated from her location like heat from a forge. Your sensory capabilities have evolved beyond normal parameters. Another sign of the ongoing transformation. They found her exactly where he'd predicted. Tsunade sat alone at a low table, surrounded by empty sake bottles and scattered cards. Even drunk and disheveled, she radiated the kind of presence that made smart people think twice about approaching uninvited. Her blonde hair was pulled back carelessly, and her famous features were flushed with alcohol and something that might have been shame. Observation, extensive intoxication, but motor control suggests functional tolerance. Emotional state, defensive, avoiding confrontation through chemical numbing. Approach, direct engagement, psychological pressure. "Lady Tsunade," Jiraiya said formally as they entered the private room. She looked up with bleary eyes that sharpened instantly when she recognized him. Jiraiya. Should have known. Her voice carried the particular slur that came from someone who was very drunk but trying hard to hide it. "Come to drag me back to that political nightmare. The third Hokage is dying," Naruto said bluntly, ignoring Jiraiya's warning look. Shock tactics cut through defensive barriers with direct emotional impact. Tsunade's sake cup stopped halfway to her lips. "What?" "Orochimaru," Jiraiya explained, shooting Naruto an annoyed glance. "The invasion 2 days ago, the old man pushed himself too hard. And you want me to fix him?" Tsunade's voice went flat and cold. "Like I fixed Dan, like I fixed my little brother," guilt response triggered. She's associating medical intervention with personal failure, classic trauma reaction. "No," Naruto said, stepping closer to the table. "I want you to remember what it means to be a healer instead of a coward." The silence that followed could have been cut with a kunai. Jiraiya sucked in a sharp breath, and Tsunade's chakra flared with enough killing intent to make the walls creak. Dangerous provocation. She could kill you before you could react. But psychological breakthrough requires breaking through defensive structures. "What?" Tsunade said very quietly. "Did you just call me a coward?" Naruto settled into the chair across from her with casual confidence that belonged to someone who'd never doubted their ability to handle whatever came next. Someone who ran away when things got difficult instead of facing their responsibilities. Bold strategy, also potentially suicidal. Tsunade was on her feet instantly, her hand drawn back for a blow that would put him through the wall. But instead of flinching, Naruto just looked at her with steady eyes that held knowledge they shouldn't have possessed. "Go ahead," he said calmly. "Prove my point." "What are you doing?" She's one of the legendary Sannin. Her punch could liquefy you. But something in his tone, some quality of absolute certainty, made Tsunade hesitate. Her fist remained cocked back, trembling with barely contained violence, but she didn't complete the strike. "You don't know anything about me," she snarled. "I know you're the world's greatest medical ninja," Naruto replied conversationally. "I know you've saved thousands of lives with techniques no one else could master. I know you loved two people deeply, and they both died despite everything you could do for them. Accurate but incomplete. There's more to her psychological profile. And I know," he continued, his voice dropping to something that might have been compassion, "that you blame yourself for not being good enough to save them." Tsunade's hand slowly lowered. How do you? Because I understand guilt," Naruto said simply. "I understand what it feels like to carry responsibility for things beyond your control. Do you? You're 12 years old. What responsibility could you possibly understand?" But even as the analytical voice questioned him, Naruto felt the weight of recent decisions. The mercenaries he'd killed in Wave, the tactical choices that had determined who lived and died during the invasion, the growing realization that people looked to him for leadership he wasn't sure he deserved. "You understand because you're becoming someone who makes life and death decisions, someone who bears the weight of consequences. The third Hokage isn't Dan," he continued, meeting Tsunade's haunted gaze. "He isn't your brother. He's a different person with different injuries in different circumstances. Refusing to try doesn't honor their memory, it dishonors everyone you could save in the future." Logical reframing. Shift guilt from personal failure to potential failure of duty. "You think it's that simple?" Tsunade's voice cracked slightly. "You think I can just try again, like the fear doesn't exist?" "I think fear is normal," Naruto replied. "But I also think hiding from it makes you less than what you could be." "When did you become qualified to give psychological counseling to legendary ninja?" The question came from his own mind, but he didn't have an answer. Only the growing certainty that he understood people, their motivations, their fears, their breaking points, in ways that felt both intuitive and learned. "Besides," he added, allowing some of his real personality to color his voice, "what's the worst that could happen? You try to save him and fail, at least then you'd have tried. Right now, you're failing without even attempting." Brutal but effective. Present the current situation as already a failure to reframe the risk assessment. Tsunade stared at him for a long moment, and he could see the war playing out across her features. Duty versus fear, hope versus despair, the desire to help against the terror of losing someone else. "You're not what I expected," she said finally. "I'm not what anyone expected," Naruto admitted. "Including myself." The admission hung between them like a bridge. For just a moment, the drunk, guilt-ridden woman and the strange boy who thought like a military commander found common ground in their mutual uncertainty about who they were supposed to be. "If I go back," Tsunade said slowly, "and he dies anyway, then at least you'll know you tried everything possible," Naruto finished. "And maybe that's enough." No, it isn't. Failure is failure, regardless of effort expended. But she needs to believe that attempt has value independent of outcome. Before Tsunade could respond, the door to the private room exploded inward. Through the smoking wreckage stepped two figures that made Naruto's analytical mind immediately shift into combat assessment mode. Orochimaru, Yakushi Kabuto, threat level, extreme, tactical situation, compromised. Well, Orochimaru's voice carried that particular brand of cultured menace that came from someone who viewed violence as an art form. What an interesting gathering. The pale Sannin looked exactly as Naruto remembered from the Forest of Death, inhuman grace, predatory intelligence, and the kind of presence that made survival instincts scream warnings. Beside him, Kabuto appeared deceptively harmless, his medical ninja facade barely concealing the calculation in his eyes. They're here for Tsunade, probably trying to recruit her for something. Standard intelligence gathering or active recruitment operation. Orochimaru, Tsunade breathed, and her voice carried a mixture of fear and rage that suggested significant history. "My dear Tsunade," the snake Sannin purred. "Still drowning your sorrows in sake, I see. How predictable. Psychological warfare. He's trying to destabilize her emotional state before making whatever offer he's planned." "What do you want?" Jiraiya demanded, his hand already moving toward his summoning scroll. "What I've always wanted," Orochimaru replied with that unsettling smile. "Progress, evolution. The transcendence of human limitations." His golden eyes fixed on Tsunade with disturbing intensity. "I have a proposition, my dear teammate. Your medical expertise in exchange for something I know you want desperately. Here it comes. The offer designed to exploit her specific psychological vulnerabilities. I can bring them back," Orochimaru continued, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. Dan, Nawaki. Both of them whole and alive with all their memories intact. Resurrection technique. Edo Tensei, most likely. Powerful leverage against someone consumed by guilt over losing loved ones. The effect on Tsunade was immediate and devastating. Her face went white, her hands trembling as the implications hit her. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Is it?" Orochimaru's smile widened. "I've made significant breakthroughs in my research. The boundary between life and death is far more porous than most people realize." He's lying, of course. Edo Tensei doesn't truly resurrect, it creates puppet versions controlled by the summoner. But she wants to believe badly enough that rational assessment becomes compromised. "Don't listen to him," Jiraiya warned. "Whatever he's offering, the price isn't worth it." But Tsunade was already leaning forward, hope and desperation warring in her expression. "What would you need from me?" Tactical error. She's allowing emotional attachment to override strategic thinking. "Intervention required. Just your skills," Orochimaru purred. "There are certain medical procedures that require expertise I don't possess. Help me complete my research, and I'll return everyone you've ever lost." Standard manipulation technique. Promise the impossible to secure cooperation, then reveal true terms after commitment is made. "He's lying," Naruto said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him, and he realized with growing unease that he'd spoken with absolute certainty. Not the certainty of someone making an educated guess, but the certainty of someone who knew exactly what Orochimaru was offering and why it wouldn't work as promised. "How do you know that?" "You've never encountered resurrection techniques before." But he did know. Somehow, he understood the fundamental principles involved, could see the flaws in the logical structure that Orochimaru was presenting. "Because you've dealt with undead before. Different context, different mechanisms, but the same underlying principles. True resurrection is impossible. What remains is always something less than what was lost." "Interesting," Orochimaru hissed, his attention focusing on Naruto with predatory interest. "The boy seems remarkably well-informed for a simple genin. Dangerous attention. He's beginning to suspect you're not what you appear to be." "I know enough about death to recognize lies about bringing people back," Naruto replied, forcing steadiness into his voice. "Death is permanent. What he's offering is puppetry." The words came out with disturbing certainty, backed by knowledge he couldn't explain. Around the room, he could see the adults processing his statement with varying degrees of surprise and concern. "You're revealing capabilities again. Eventually, the inconsistencies in your behavior will become impossible to explain away." My, Orochimaru murmured, taking a step closer. "Such wisdom from someone so young. Tell me, boy, where did you learn about the nature of death and resurrection?" Trap question. "Whatever answer you give will reveal more about your true nature." "From living with a demon sealed in my gut," Naruto replied, which was true enough to pass casual scrutiny. "You pick up things about life and death when you carry something like that around." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was believable. More importantly, it shifted attention away from his analytical capabilities and toward the more obvious explanation for unusual knowledge. "The Nine Tails," Kabuto said thoughtfully. "Yes, that would provide unique perspectives on mortality." "Good, they're accepting the deflection. But remain cautious. Orochimaru is too intelligent to be fooled for long." "Regardless," Orochimaru continued, his gaze shifting back to Tsunade, "my offer stands. Your loved ones return to life in exchange for your cooperation." Decision point. She'll either accept based on emotional desperation or reject based on rational analysis. Your next words will likely determine the outcome. "Tsunade," Naruto said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made adults listen despite his age. "What would Dan think about you trading your principles for a chance to see him again?" The question hit like a physical blow. Tsunade's face crumpled, and for a moment she looked like what she was, a woman who'd carried grief for too long, trying to decide between hope and wisdom. Psychological leverage. Appeal to the values of the deceased to influence current decision-making, effective but emotionally manipulative. "He'd," she started, then stopped. When she continued, her voice was stronger. "He'd hate it. He'd hate knowing I compromised everything we believed in just to see him again." Correct assessment. She's regaining rational perspective. The immediate crisis is passing. "How touching," Orochimaru said with cold amusement. "But misguided, the dead care nothing for the principles of the living." "Maybe not," Naruto replied, stepping between Orochimaru and Tsunade. "But the living have to care about the principles of the dead. Otherwise, what's the point of remembering them at all?" When did you become a philosopher? These insights suggest depth of experience that contradicts your apparent age. The thought was troubling, but less important than the immediate tactical situation. Orochimaru's expression had shifted from amusement to calculation, and Naruto could see the moment when negotiation transformed into potential violence. He's reassessing the situation. Your interference has altered his strategic calculus. Prepare for escalation. I think, Orochimaru said with deceptive casualness, that you've said quite enough, young man. The attack came without further warning, a blur of motion that should have been impossible to track, let alone counter. But somehow Naruto was already moving, his body flowing through defensive positions that felt both foreign and familiar. Combat algorithms activated. Threat assessment, extreme speed, multiple attack vectors, lethal intent. Response. Tactical withdrawal and terrain utilization. He didn't try to block or counter, that would have been suicide. Instead, he used the momentum of Orochimaru's attack to redirect the Snake Sannin's movement, creating an opening that allowed Jiraiya and Tsunade to respond. Where did you learn evasion techniques at that level? But there was no time for analysis. The room had exploded into violence, and keeping everyone alive required focus on immediate tactical necessities rather than long-term questions about his evolving capabilities. As jutsu began flying, and the building shook with the force of Sannin-level combat, Naruto found himself coordinating defensive positions with the casual competence of someone who'd managed battlefield operations before. Because you have managed them before. The question is when, where, and in what context. But that was a puzzle for later. Right now, he had a medical ninja to convince, a village to save, and a growing sense that the person he was becoming might be exactly what the situation required, even if he wasn't entirely sure who that person was. The battle lasted 17 minutes and changed everything. When the dust settled in what remained of Tanzaku Town's most expensive gambling house, Orochimaru lay unconscious in a crater of his own making. Kabuto had fled into the night, and Tsunade stood over them both with her fists still glowing with medical chakra turned destructive. But it was the way Naruto had moved during the fight that left everyone staring. Combat performance analysis. Evasion rate 97%, tactical coordination flawless, predictive capabilities beyond normal parameters. You fought like someone with decades of experience. That was impossible, Jiraiya said quietly, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and concern. No genin should be able to coordinate in Sannin-level combat like that. Naruto looked down at his hands, still trembling with residual adrenaline. During the fight, he'd moved with perfect precision, anticipating attacks before they were launched, positioning himself and others with tactical awareness that felt as natural as breathing. Because it is natural. You've commanded forces through countless similar engagements. Different setting, different stakes, but identical strategic principles. I don't know how I did it, he said honestly. It just felt right. Tsunade wiped blood from her split lip, studying him with the kind of clinical attention she usually reserved for complex medical cases. That coordination technique you used, directing our movements without verbal communication, I've never seen anything like it. Battlefield telepathy. Basic command protocol for managing subordinates during complex operations. Elementary technique for experienced leaders. The knowledge came with disturbing clarity, accompanied by memories that couldn't possibly be his. Images of commanding floor guardians through elaborate tactical scenarios, coordinating magical effects across multiple spellcasters, treating combat like an elaborate chess game where every piece had a specific role. Stop, he told himself firmly. Those aren't your memories. They can't be. Can't they? Then explain how you knew exactly when Orochimaru would shift his attack pattern. How you predicted Kabuto's flanking maneuver. How you coordinated 3 Sannin-level combatants without missing a beat. The questions hung in his mind like accusations. Around him, the adults were having a quiet conversation about extraction routes and medical priorities, but he could feel their sideways glances, the weight of their growing suspicion. We need to get back, Tsunade said finally, shouldering her medical kit with professional efficiency. If what you said about the third's condition is accurate, we don't have much time. The journey back to Konoha passed in a blur of forced marches and tense silence. Naruto found himself running point, his enhanced senses automatically scanning for threats while his tactical mind processed potential ambush sites and escape routes. When did you learn reconnaissance protocols? When did terrain analysis become instinctive? He didn't have answers, only the growing certainty that whoever he was becoming, it wasn't entirely human. They arrived to find the village in controlled chaos. Emergency protocols were still in effect from the invasion, with Chenbu patrols maintaining security while civilian cleanup crews worked to repair the damage. But underneath the organized activity, Naruto could sense something else, a tension that spoke of political maneuvering and difficult decisions being made behind closed doors. Standard post-crisis power consolidation. Someone's using the current instability to advance their agenda. The council's been meeting constantly since we left, Kakashi reported as they rushed toward the hospital. Decisions about succession, restructuring the command hierarchy, new security protocols. Translation: they're preparing for the third Hokage's death and positioning themselves for maximum influence over his replacement. The thought came with clinical detachment that made Naruto feel sick. When had he started thinking about politics like a chess game where human suffering was just another variable? When you became capable of seeing the bigger picture. When you started understanding that individual tragedies serve larger strategic purposes. They found Hiruzen barely clinging to life, his breathing so shallow it was barely visible. The medical team had done everything they could, but his condition had deteriorated beyond conventional treatment. "How long does he have?" Tsunade asked, her professional mask sliding into place as she began her examination. "Hours, maybe less," the head medic replied. "His chakra coils are burned out and there's extensive internal bleeding we can't stop." Survivability assessment, critical. Even with Tsunade's intervention, success probability remains low. Prepare for leadership transition scenarios. But as Naruto watched the legendary medical ninja work, he felt something else stirring, knowledge that came from somewhere deeper than tactical analysis. Advanced healing techniques, cellular regeneration protocols, medical applications that transcend conventional limitations. The information flooded his consciousness like water through a broken dam. Complex procedures that combined chakra manipulation with theoretical frameworks that felt almost like magic. Healing magic adapted for biological systems. "Tsunade," he said quietly, "there's another way." She looked up from her examination, sweat beading her forehead from the effort of maintaining diagnostic jutsu. "What do you mean?" "Tell her about the advanced techniques. The cellular reconstruction protocols, the methods that could save him." Naruto started, then stopped. How could he explain knowledge he shouldn't possess, medical procedures that didn't officially exist in this world? "Naruto," Jiraiya said gently, "whatever you're thinking, now isn't the time for experimentation. Now is exactly the time. He's dying regardless. What's the risk in attempting something unprecedented?" Before he could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the hospital. The harsh, urgent sound that meant imminent threat, all hands to defensive positions. "What now?" Tsunade muttered, not looking up from her patient. Through the window, they could see Chenbu operatives racing across the village rooftops. But this wasn't the organized response of professionals dealing with external threats. This was the frantic movement of people responding to internal crisis. "Report," Kakashi barked at a medical ninja who just burst through the door. "Sasuke Uchiha," the woman gasped. "He's gone, left the village during the night shift change. Intelligence suggests he's defecting to sound." Predictable. Orochimaru's recruitment attempt during the invasion was successful. Standard enemy infiltration and asset extraction. The clinical assessment made perfect sense, but underneath it, Naruto felt something else. A pain that had nothing to do with tactical considerations and everything to do with friendship. "He's going to Orochimaru," he said with certainty that surprised everyone in the room. "How do you know that?" Jiraiya asked. "Because you understand Sasuke's psychological profile. His obsession with power, his willingness to sacrifice everything for revenge, his fundamental inability to trust others with his burdens." "Because I know him," Naruto replied. "And I know what Orochimaru offered him." The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of medical equipment and Hiruzen's labored breathing. In that moment, Naruto felt the weight of multiple crises converging: the dying Hokage, the defecting teammate, the growing suspicion about his own nature. Decision point: you can stay here and attempt to save the third Hokage or pursue Sasuke before he reaches enemy territory. Both are time critical. Choose. For a moment, he was paralyzed by the magnitude of the choice. Save the man who'd been like a grandfather to him, or save the teammate who was walking into darkness. Leaders make difficult choices. That's what separates commanders from subordinates. "I have to go after him," he said finally. "Naruto," Tsunade started. "No." His voice carried absolute authority, the tone of someone who'd made countless life-and-death decisions and learned to live with the consequences. Sasuke is my responsibility, my teammate. I won't let him throw his life away for revenge. Even if it means abandoning other responsibilities. Even if the third Hokage dies while you're gone. The thought hit him like a physical blow, but his resolve didn't waver. You can save him, he told Tsunade. You're the world's greatest medical ninja. If anyone can pull him back from the edge, it's you. She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Go, bring your teammate home. Excellent. Responsibility delegated to appropriate specialist while you handle the crisis that requires your specific capabilities. As he prepared to leave, Hiruzen's eyes opened, just a crack, but enough to focus on Naruto's face. The will of fire, the old man whispered, his voice barely audible. Remember what it means, the will of fire, Konoha's philosophical foundation. The principle that previous generations sacrifice for future ones, that the village's strength comes from mutual protection and shared responsibility. I will, Naruto promised, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was promising anymore. The pursuit took him through forests he'd never seen but somehow knew intimately. His enhanced senses tracked Sasuke's trail with precision that should have been impossible, reading sign and interpreting movement patterns like someone with decades of tracking experience. Sasuke's moving fast but not efficiently. Emotional decision-making compromises tactical thinking. He's taking routes that feel symbolically appropriate rather than strategically optimal. The analysis was correct, but it also hurt. Because it meant his friend was in pain, making desperate choices based on trauma rather than reason. Your friend is making the same mistake you made, assuming that power acquired through darkness can somehow illuminate the path forward. The thought came with uncomfortable personal resonance. How much of his own recent development had been about gaining power? How much of his strategic thinking was just another form of the same obsession that was driving Sasuke toward Orochimaru? The difference is that your power serves others. His serves only himself. Maybe. Or maybe that was just what he told himself to justify the changes he couldn't control. He found Sasuke at the Valley of the End, standing beneath the massive statues that commemorated the village's founding. The symbolism was so heavy-handed it almost hurt. The last Uchiha standing between the first Hokage and Madara Uchiha, trying to decide which legacy to embrace. I knew you'd come, Sasuke said without turning around. You always were predictable. He's wrong. Your pursuit wasn't predictable, it was inevitable. There's a difference. And you always were an idiot, Naruto replied, settling into a combat stance that felt both familiar and foreign. Running away when things get difficult instead of facing them with your friends. Friends, Sasuke turned, and his eyes were already spinning with the crimson pattern of the Sharingan. What would you know about friendship? You're not even human anymore. The accusation hit harder than any physical blow because it was true. Whatever he was becoming, it wasn't entirely the boy who'd grown up alone in Konoha. The tactical thinking, the strategic awareness, the casual competence in situations no 12-year-old should be able to handle, all of it pointed to something fundamental changing in his nature. He sees what the others only suspect. The question is whether you deny it or embrace it. Maybe I'm not, Naruto said quietly. Maybe I haven't been for a while now, but that doesn't mean I don't care about you. Care? Sasuke's laugh was bitter and broken. You care about an idea of me, the teammate who fit into your perfect little team structure. But I was never that person and I never will be. Incorrect assessment. You care about his potential, not his current limitations. There's a difference. You're right, Naruto admitted, surprising them both. I do care about who you could be rather than who you are right now, because right now you're a coward running away from everything that matters. The words hung between them like a challenge. Around them, the Valley of the End stretched in all directions, the statues casting long shadows in the afternoon light. This is it, the moment where you either save him or lose him forever. I'm not running, Sasuke snarled. I'm choosing power over weakness. Strength over sentiment, everything you're too naive to understand. He believes that. The tragic part is that he genuinely thinks isolation makes him stronger. Power without bonds is just fancy suicide, Naruto replied, his voice carrying conviction that came from somewhere deeper than tactical analysis. I know because I've been where you're going. In my head, in my dreams, in places that feel more real than real. I've seen what it's like to have power without connection, strength without purpose. The memories, the throne room, the empty halls, the perfect control over subjects who could never be friends. The loneliness of absolute authority. And I've seen where it leads, he continued, taking a step closer, To a throne room full of servants who fear you, respect you, obey you perfectly, and leave you completely alone. Sasuke's expression flickered, uncertainty bleeding through his confident mask. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Naruto's voice dropped to something that might have been compassion. Then why are you standing here trying to convince me instead of already gone? Why do you care what I think if bonds are just weakness, psychological leverage? He's still connected despite his claims of independence. Use that connection to reach the part of him that wants to stay. Because, Sasuke started, then stopped. When he continued, his voice was smaller. Because I wanted to see if you'd try to stop me. There it is, the real reason. He doesn't want to leave, he wants to be convinced to stay. I am trying to stop you, Naruto said gently. Not because I need you to be something you're not, but because I know who you really are underneath all the pain and anger. And who is that? Someone who cares more than he's willing to admit. Someone who's terrified of losing the people he's learned to trust. Someone who thinks isolation is safer than risking more loss. Someone who's afraid, Naruto said simply. Someone who thinks pushing people away will hurt less than watching them die. The silence that followed was broken only by the wind through the valley and the distant sound of water falling from the great statues. Sasuke stood frozen, his Sharingan spinning but his expression uncertain. You think you understand, he said finally, but you don't know what it's like to watch everyone you care about die. To be powerless when it matters most. Actually, you do know, different context, different losses, but the same fundamental fear of inadequacy in the face of mortality. Maybe not exactly, Naruto admitted. But I know what it's like to be responsible for other people's lives, to make decisions that determine who lives and who dies, to carry the weight of consequences you can't undo. When did you learn that? You're 12 years old. But even as the analytical voice questioned him, Naruto felt the truth of the statement. Somehow, somewhere, he had carried that kind of responsibility. The memories might be fragmented and confusing, but the emotional weight was real. The difference, he continued, is that I learned something you haven't figured out yet. What's that? That you can't protect people by abandoning them. That strength without connection is just another form of weakness. Naruto extended his hand toward his teammate. Come home, Sasuke, we'll figure out the rest together. This is the moment. He either chooses trust or chooses isolation. Your words have done all they can, now it's up to him. For a long moment, Sasuke stared at the offered hand. In his expression, Naruto could see the war between hope and fear, between the desire for connection and the terror of more loss. Then, slowly, Sasuke reached out and grasped his hand. Together, he asked quietly. Together, Naruto confirmed, no matter what comes next. Even if what comes next is the complete transformation of who you are, even if saving him means losing yourself, the questions would have to wait. For now, it was enough that his teammate was coming home, that the bonds between them had proven stronger than the darkness that threatened to consume them both. As they began the journey back to Konoha, Naruto felt something shift inside him, not the tactical analysis or strategic thinking that had been growing stronger, but something deeper. The part of him that was still just Naruto Uzumaki, still the boy who wanted to protect his friends above all else. That's the real strength, isn't it? Not the power to command or control, but the willingness to risk everything for the people who matter. Maybe that was what the third Hokage had meant by the will of fire. Not the cold calculation of acceptable losses, but the burning determination to save everyone you could, no matter the cost to yourself. Even if the cost is becoming someone your friends might not recognize. Even then, Naruto whispered to himself as they walked through the gathering darkness. Behind them, the Valley of the End stood silent witness to their choice, a reminder that some battles were won not through strength or strategy, but through the simple refusal to give up on the people you loved. No matter what it cost you in the end. Dawn broke over Konoha with the kind of golden light that made promises about new beginnings. Naruto stood in the Hokage's office, the same room where this journey had truly begun, where he'd first started asking uncomfortable questions about his changing nature. But now, 3 weeks after bringing Sasuke home and watching Tsunade work a miracle that saved the third Hokage's life, everything felt different. Analysis complete, threat neutralized, strategic objectives achieved. Mission parameters exceeded. The analytical voice was still there, would probably always be there, but it no longer felt foreign. Somewhere between the Valley of the End and this moment, he'd stopped fighting the duality and started embracing it. The council's decision is final, Hiruzen said, his voice stronger than it had been in months. Tsunade's treatment had saved his life, but more than that, it had given him a vitality that made him seem years younger. You'll be granted special Jounin status, effective immediately. Rapid promotion based on demonstrated tactical capabilities. Standard procedure for exceptional combat performance and leadership potential. Special Jounin, Sakura asked from her position beside Team 7's reformed lineup. But Naruto's still only 12. Age becomes irrelevant when someone demonstrates capabilities that save hundreds of lives, Kakashi replied, though his visible eye was fixed on Naruto with something that might have been pride or concern. The coordination during the invasion alone would warrant the promotion. Naruto accepted the new insignia with steady hands, feeling the weight of what it represented. Not just advancement in rank, but acknowledgement of what he'd become, someone who could bear responsibility for others, who could make the hard choices that leadership demanded. You've achieved recognition through competence rather than sentiment. The optimal path for establishing authority. There are conditions, Hamura added, speaking for the council members present. Your unique capabilities require oversight, specialized training to ensure they develop properly. Translation. They're still nervous about your true nature but recognize your value. Standard management protocol for valuable but unpredictable assets. What kind of specialized training? Sasuke asked. His teammate had been quieter since returning from his brief flirtation with darkness, but more present somehow. As if nearly losing everything had taught him to value what he had. The kind that acknowledges certain realities about power and responsibility, Jiraiya said, stepping forward with a scroll bearing official seals. Congratulations, Naruto, you're now my official apprentice. Excellent. Jiraiya's training will provide legitimate cover for continued capability development while maintaining operational security. But underneath the tactical satisfaction, Naruto felt something warmer, genuine gratitude for the recognition, for the trust being placed in him, for the chance to grow into whatever he was becoming with proper guidance. There's one more thing, Hiruzen said, his expression growing more serious. The abilities you've demonstrated, the tactical coordination, the strategic thinking, the unconventional techniques, they've raised questions throughout the shinobi world. Of course they have. Exceptional capability always attracts attention. The question is whether that attention becomes beneficial or problematic. Other villages have taken notice, Koharu continued. Some are curious about how Konoha developed such advanced tactical training. Others are concerned about potential threats to the balance of power. Let them be concerned, Naruto said, surprising himself with the confidence in his voice. As long as they know that Konoha protects its own and honors its alliances, their concerns are their own problem. Diplomatic assertiveness backed by demonstrated capability. Good positioning for future negotiations. The adults exchanged meaningful looks, the kind of silent communication that came from decades of shared experience with complex political situations. That's exactly the kind of thinking that makes you valuable, Hiruzen said with a slight smile. And exactly the kind that requires careful cultivation. 2 hours later, Naruto found himself on the roof of the Hokage Tower, looking out over the village he'd helped save. The repairs from the invasion were nearly complete, and life was returning to something approaching normal. Children played in the streets below, vendors called out their wares, and the steady pulse of civilian activity created the background rhythm of a thriving community. Population approximately 60,000 civilians, 3,000 active shinobi, strategic location controlling major trade routes. Significant political and economic influence despite relatively small size. The analytical assessment came automatically, but it was followed by something else. A warm satisfaction at seeing people safe, happy, going about their daily lives without fear. When did you start seeing both the strategic value and the human worth? When did they stop being mutually exclusive? Complicated thoughts, Kakashi asked, appearing beside him with that soundless movement all elite ninja seemed to master. Just processing, Naruto replied. Everything that's happened, everything that's changed. You mean everything you've changed into? It wasn't a question, and Naruto didn't treat it like one. Yeah. I'm not the same person who failed the Genin exam 6 months ago. Accurate assessment. That person lacked the knowledge, capability, and perspective required for current operational parameters. No, you're not, Kakashi agreed. The question is whether you're comfortable with who you've become. Naruto considered the question seriously. Was he comfortable with the tactical mind that could calculate casualty rates in real time? With the strategic thinking that sometimes viewed people as resources to be managed? With the growing certainty that he was becoming someone who could, and would, make the kind of decisions that kept civilizations functioning? You're becoming what the situation requires, someone capable of bearing the weight of leadership without being crushed by it. I think, he said slowly, that I'm becoming someone who can protect the people I care about. If that means being something different than what I was, then I'm okay with that. Even if it means sometimes being someone your friends don't entirely recognize, the core fear. That transformation will cost you the connections that make life meaningful. Sasuke recognized me, Naruto replied. When it mattered, when he was standing at the edge of darkness, he looked at me and saw someone worth trusting. If I can be that for the people who need it, then the rest is just details. Kakashi was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a note of something that might have been approval. That's a very mature perspective for someone your age. Yeah, well, Naruto grinned, and for a moment he was just a 12-year-old boy making jokes with his teacher. I've been having a lot of very mature experiences lately. The duality stabilizes. You can be both the tactical commander and the loyal friend, both the strategic thinker and the compassionate protector. There's something else you should know, Kakashi continued. The third has been having discussions about the future, about succession planning, about what kind of leadership Konoha will need in the years ahead, political positioning. They're considering you for eventual leadership roles despite your age, standard practice for exceptional candidates. I'm 12, Naruto pointed out. You're 12 now. You won't be 12 forever. Kakashi's visible eye crinkled with something that might have been amusement. And the village needs leaders who can think both tactically and compassionately. People who can make the hard choices without losing sight of why those choices matter. Hokage track positioning. They're grooming you for eventual command authority. The realization should have been overwhelming. Instead, it felt like recognition of something he'd already known on some level. He was becoming someone who could lead, who could bear the weight of other people's lives and well-being, because you've done it before. Different context, different world, but the same fundamental challenge. What if I'm not ready? He asked. What if you are? Kakashi replied. What if you've been ready for longer than anyone realized and you're just now growing into the confidence to accept it? Accurate assessment. The capabilities preceded the conscious recognition. You've been operating at command level for months. You're simply acknowledging it now. Below them, the village continued its daily rhythm. People living their lives, raising their children, building their futures in the security that came from knowing someone was willing to protect them. This is what it means to lead. Not the power to control, but the responsibility to protect. Not the authority to command, but the willingness to serve. Naruto, Kakashi said as they prepared to leave the rooftop, there's one more thing you should consider. What's that? The person you're becoming, the tactical thinking, the strategic awareness, all of it, it's not replacing who you were. It's completing it. His visible eye grew serious. The boy who just wants to be acknowledged is still there. He's just learned that the best way to earn acknowledgement is to become someone worth acknowledging. Truth. The core personality remains intact while the capabilities expand to meet requirements. As they made their way down from the tower, Naruto felt something settle into place inside him. Not the end of change. He suspected he'd be evolving for years to come, but the acceptance of what he was becoming. Someone who could think like a commander and feel like a friend. Someone who could calculate the odds of survival and still fight for everyone's life. Someone who understood that true strength came not from power alone, but from the willingness to use that power in service of something larger than himself. The synthesis is complete. You are neither fully Naruto Uzumaki nor fully the Overlord, but something new that incorporates both. That evening, Team 7 gathered at Ikaraku's for what had become their traditional celebration dinner. Sasuke sat quietly beside him, still processing his own journey back from the edge. Sakura chattered excitedly about her new medical training with Tsunade. Kakashi read his orange book with one eye while keeping the other on his students. Standard team bonding activity. Maintains group cohesion while providing informal debriefing opportunity. But the analytical assessment was immediately followed by something warmer, genuine affection for these people who'd become his family, gratitude for the bonds that had shaped him into someone capable of protecting others. So, Sakura said between bites of ramen, what happens now, with the promotion and the apprenticeship and everything? Now we keep getting stronger, Naruto replied. Keep learning, keep growing, keep protecting the people who matter. Chen. Sasuke's contribution was characteristically minimal, but there was agreement in it. Together, together. The word that makes all the difference between power and strength, between commanding and leading. Together, Naruto confirmed, raising his cup of tea in a mock toast. Whatever comes next. What comes next is the continuation of your development into a leader worthy of the trust being placed in you. What comes next is learning to balance the tactical necessities with the human connections that give those necessities meaning. As they sat in the warm glow of Ikaraku's lights, surrounded by the easy chatter of friends who'd been through fire together and emerged stronger, Naruto felt the future spreading out before him like a map of possibilities. He would train with Jiraiya, learning to refine his capabilities while maintaining his humanity. He would grow into the kind of leader Konoha needed, someone who could make the hard choices while never forgetting why those choices mattered. He would become worthy of the trust his friends placed in him, worthy of the responsibility the village was preparing to give him. Most importantly, you will learn to be yourself, not the boy you were or the leader you're becoming, but the synthesis of both that represents your true strength. Outside, Konoha settled into evening quiet, secure in the knowledge that it was protected by people willing to sacrifice for its well-being. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new opportunities to grow and serve. But tonight, Naruto Uzumaki, special Jounin, tactical prodigy, loyal friend, and future Hokage, was exactly where he belonged. At a ramen stand with his team, planning for a future that would be built on the foundation of bonds that could survive any transformation. The will of fire burns brightest when it's shared, he thought, watching his friends laugh in the lamplight. And I finally understand what that means. The boy who'd wanted nothing more than acknowledgement had become someone whose acknowledgement others would seek. The transformation was complete, but the journey was just beginning. Both, the voice whispered one final time, now fully integrated into his consciousness rather than separate from it. Always both. In the distance, the Hokage monument stood silent watch over the village, its carved faces reminding everyone of the leaders who'd sacrificed everything for the people they served. Someday, Naruto knew, his face might join theirs. When it did, he would be ready, not because he'd gained power, but because he'd learned to wield it with wisdom. The will of fire would live on, carried by someone who understood that true strength came not from standing above others, but from lifting them up. And in that understanding, both Naruto Uzumaki and the presence within him found peace. Man, what a ride! From that first graduation failure to becoming someone even the Hokage respects, Naruto found the perfect balance between tactical genius and loyal friend. The way he talked Sasuke down at the valley. Chef's kiss pure emotional intelligence meets strategic thinking. Drop a comment with your favorite "wait, when did Naruto get so smart?" moment. Mine's definitely when he psychologically dismantled Gato without throwing a single punch. Subscribe for more What If Your Favorite Character Was Secretly Broken the Whole Time content, and I'll catch you in the next one. Later.